Hey everyone, tonight we're wandering into a corner of medieval life that was noisy, crowded, and about as comfortable as sleeping in a barn full of strangers. Welcome to the Brothel, a place where candles burn low, coins change hands quickly, and the smell of smoke, ale, and damp wool hangs permanently in the air. Before we step inside, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you enjoy drifting off to strange, slightly uncomfortable pieces of real history. And if you'd like, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, settle into your blankets, and imagine the narrow streets of a medieval city after dark. What was life actually like inside a brothel in the Middle Ages? Was it glamorous? Or just another crowded building filled with tired workers, restless travelers, and rules meant to keep the chaos under control? What did people eat? Where did they sleep? Who ran these places? And how did anyone survive working there, night after night? Tonight, we're going to spend one long evening inside one of these houses and see what daily life might have looked like for the people who lived and worked there. So take a deep breath, because it's the year 1352. And you've just arrived in the busiest part of the medieval red light district. You wake slowly, the way people do when sleep has been interrupted by something unpleasant, but not quite alarming enough to cause panic. The first sensation you notice is the cold. It has settled into your clothes and crept through the fabric until it feels like it has soaked directly into your bones. The second sensation is the smell. At first, it is faint, but within a few breaths, it becomes impossible to ignore. It is not a single odor, but a complicated mixture drifting through the night air. Damp earth, old smoke, rotting vegetables, horse manure, stale ale, and something sour you would rather not identify. The entire alley seems to breathe this scent out slowly, as if the walls themselves have absorbed centuries of it and decided to release it all at once. When you finally open your eyes, the world above you is a narrow strip of dark sky, framed by crooked medieval buildings, leaning toward each other like tired old men sharing a secret. The houses are made of timber and plaster, their beams warped with age, and their walls patched unevenly from years of repairs. Small windows glow dimly with candlelight behind thin shutters. Somewhere nearby, a loose board creaks with every gust of wind, and a hanging sign knocks gently against a wall with the patient rhythm of something that has been doing this for decades. You push yourself upright and immediately realize the ground beneath you is not solid. Your boots sink slightly into a thick layer of mud that has been churned into a heavy paste by countless feet, cartwheels, and hooves. This is not the clean countryside mud you might imagine from a peaceful farm path. This is city mud, a dense, unpleasant mixture of rainwater, horse dung, spilled ale, food scraps, ashes from fireplaces, and whatever else the people of this street have decided to throw outside over the past few days. Every movement produces a soft, wet squelch that seems far too loud in the quiet night air. It takes a moment for your eyes to adjust to the dim light, but slowly the shapes of the alley begin to come into focus. The street is narrow, barely wide enough for two carts to pass each other comfortably. Wooden buildings crowd close together on both sides, their upper floors leaning outward so far that the rooftops nearly meet above your head. Rainwater drips slowly from the edges of the eaves. Somewhere, a small stream of dirty water trickles along the edge of the street, carrying bits of straw and vegetable peels with it toward a drain farther down the road. At the far end of the alley hangs a lantern swaying gently in the wind. Its glow reveals a wooden doorway set into the side of one of the buildings, and beside that door hangs a carved sign suspended by iron chains. The sign moves slowly, back and forth, pushed by the wind with a tired creaking sound. Even in the dim light, you can make out the faded painting carved into its surface. It once showed a woman holding a cup of wine, though the colors have mostly washed away from years of rain and smoke. Still, the meaning is obvious enough to anyone walking past. This building is not a simple inn or tavern. This is a brothel. The alley around it is far from quiet. A pair of men stagger past the doorway, arguing loudly about something that might once have been a dice game. Their cloaks hang crookedly from their shoulders, and their speech has the slow, exaggerated rhythm of people who have consumed more ale than good judgment. One of them nearly slips in the mud, but manages to catch himself on the wall before collapsing completely. They continue down the street, their voices fading into the distance as they debate who cheated whom. A skinny dog darts across the alley carrying a chunk of bread in its mouth, glancing nervously behind it, as if expecting someone to give chase. It disappears beneath a cart parked along the wall, where it begins tearing into its prize with enthusiastic determination. Above you, somewhere in the darkness, a wooden shutter suddenly scrapes open. A voice calls out a brief warning, the traditional medieval courtesy offered before throwing waste into the street. And a moment later, a splash of foul-smelling liquid lands several feet away from where you stand. The smell in the alley becomes noticeably stronger. This is simply how a medieval city works. Without proper plumbing, people dispose of waste the easiest way they know how, by throwing it out the window. They are feeling polite. They shout a warning first. If they are tired, or annoyed, or in a hurry, they sometimes forget. You step carefully across the mud, brushing a little dirt from your cloak and trying to avoid the darker patches on the ground that look especially suspicious. As you begin to pay closer attention, the nighttime sounds of the city reveal themselves one by one. Somewhere nearby, a group of men laugh loudly inside a tavern. The clatter of wooden mugs striking a table echoes faintly through an open window. A horse snorts impatiently as a cart rattles past the end of the alley. From farther down the street comes the soft music of a flute, played by someone with enough talent to make even a gloomy alley sound almost pleasant. The medieval city does not go to sleep when the sun sets. In many ways, this is when it becomes most alive. Figures move through the lantern light in slow, wandering patterns. Some are travelers with dusty cloaks and heavy bags slung over their shoulders. Others are laborers still wearing the rough clothes they worked in all day. A few keep their heads lowered and their faces hidden beneath their hats, hoping not to be recognized by neighbors or acquaintances. Despite their differences, many of them drift toward the same destination, the door beneath the swaying lantern. You watch as a merchant approaches the brothel entrance, with the careful dignity of a man who would very much like to appear respectable while doing something slightly questionable. He pauses outside the door, adjusting his hat and glancing briefly up and down the street as if checking for witnesses. Then, satisfied that no one important is watching, he slips inside. The door opens just long enough for a burst of warm air and laughter to escape into the cold alley before it closes again with a heavy thud. The sign outside continues its slow creaking dance in the wind. Nearby, a pair of cats sit quietly on a windowsill, observing the street with the bored patience of animals that have seen this same nightly routine play out countless times before. One flicks its tail lazily as another passerby splashes through the mud below. A tavern door farther down the street suddenly bursts open, and a group of soldiers spill out into the night air, their boots pounding heavily on the cobblestones. They argue loudly about something involving dice and missing coins before one of them gestures enthusiastically toward the brothel door. The others nod with immediate approval, and the group staggers in that direction with the cheerful determination of men who have recently been paid and have no intention of keeping their money for long. This is the rhythm of the medieval red light district. Taverns send their customers here. Travelers seek warmth and company after long days on the road. Soldiers spend their wages before they disappear again into another campaign. Merchants pretend they are only stopping briefly before continuing their journey in the morning. The brothel sits at the center of this strange nighttime ecosystem, like a glowing lantern attracting moths. Another cart rolls slowly past the alley entrance, pulled by a horse that looks deeply unimpressed by the entire scene. The driver glances briefly down the narrow street before continuing on his way. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls softly. It marks the official curfew hour, though that rule is often ignored in neighborhoods where money changes hands frequently enough. The brothel door opens again. This time, a woman steps outside, carrying a small lantern. She pauses on the threshold, scanning the street with the calm, experienced eyes of someone who has spent years judging strangers quickly. Her gaze lands on you for a moment, lingering just long enough to assess whether you look dangerous, drunk, or merely lost. Apparently deciding you are harmless enough, she gives a small shrug and disappears back inside. The door closes behind her, sealing the warmth and noise within. The wind sweeps down the alley again, tugging at your cloak. The hanging sign creaks softly above your head while the lantern flickers in the darkness. Inside the brothel, laughter rises once more, followed by the unmistakable sound of coins clinking together. The night in this part of the city is only just beginning, and the strange, restless life of the medieval red light district continues to unfold around you. The door to the brothel stands only a few steps away now, and from where you are standing in the damp alley, it does not look especially impressive. It is a thick wooden door, scarred with scratches and dents that suggest years of heavy use. The iron hinges groan slightly every time it opens, and judging by the scuffed mud marks around the frame, it opens often. The lantern hanging above it throws a restless yellow light across the doorway, flickering each time the wind pushes down the narrow alley. Even before you reach the entrance, the sounds from inside drift out in uneven bursts whenever the door swings open. Laughter, voices arguing over something trivial, the clatter of cups and the scrape of chairs against wooden floors. It is the sound of a place that never truly rests. When the door opens again, warm air spills outward into the cold street. The difference in temperature is immediate and strangely inviting. Outside, the night air is damp and heavy, filled with the unpleasant odors of the city streets. Inside, there is warmth from the hearth, thick smoke from candles and torches, and a complicated mixture of scents that your nose tries to untangle. There is cheap perfume somewhere in the air, sweet but slightly sour beneath the stronger smell of burning wood and spilled ale. Someone inside laughs loudly, followed by the low murmur of several conversations happening at once. The moment feels like standing at the mouth of a cave that contains an entire world of its own. You step forward and push the door open. The hinges groan with a tired complaint as you cross the threshold, and immediately the world changes. The noise grows louder, the air warmer, and the smell much thicker. For a moment, your eyes struggle to adjust to the dim candlelight inside. The room is darker than you expected, illuminated mostly by a cluster of candles scattered across tables and mounted on iron holders along the walls. Their flames flicker constantly as people move through the room, casting restless shadows that dance across the timber beams of the ceiling. The brothel's main room is crowded, though not in the tidy, organized way of a respectable tavern. This place has the feeling of a space that has grown slowly over time rather than being carefully designed. Tables sit wherever there was once room to place them. Chairs are mismatched and uneven. A long wooden bench runs along one wall, currently occupied by three men who appear to be in the middle of an intense debate about something involving trade routes and missing cargo. Their voices raise and fall with dramatic seriousness, while a woman sitting beside them rolls her eyes in quiet amusement. The floor beneath your feet is wooden but uneven, with boards that creak and bend slightly as people walk across them. A layer of straw has been scattered across parts of the floor to absorb spilled drinks and mud tracked in from outside. The straw crunches softly as you step forward, releasing faint earthy smells with every movement. it does little to hide the fact that dozens of muddy boots have passed through this room already tonight. The smoke inside the brothel hangs thick in the air, forming a hazy cloud beneath the low ceiling. Candles burn constantly here, and somewhere in the back of the room, a hearth crackles with a small fire that adds both warmth and more smoke to the already crowded atmosphere. Mixed with it all is the smell of cheap perfume, likely applied generously in an attempt to disguise less pleasant odors. The result is a scent that is strangely sweet and smoky at the same time. Your eyes finally adjust enough to take in the full scene. The room is alive with movement. Guests sit at tables drinking ale from wooden mugs, while others lean against the walls, speaking quietly with women who appear to know exactly how to guide conversations toward profitable conclusions. The workers move through the crowd with practiced efficiency, stepping around chairs and weaving between customers without interrupting the rhythm of the room. Some carry trays of drinks, while others stop occasionally beside a table to exchange a few words and a quick smile before continuing on their way. Not everyone here looks like they belong to the same world. A merchant sits near the hearth wearing a thick wool cloak trimmed with fur, counting coins carefully into a small pouch. Across from him sits a man in a soldier's tunic whose boots are still dusty from travel. A pair of younger men, who look like apprentices, whisper to each other nervously while trying to appear confident. A traveler, with a broad hat and road-worn cloak, has fallen half asleep against the wall, his mug still clutched loosely in one hand. The conversations blend together into a constant hum. Bits of gossip drift through the air, stories of trade deals gone wrong, rumors about taxes, complaints about weather and harvests. Somewhere near the back of the room, a musician strums softly on a lute, the music nearly lost beneath the louder voices, but still persistent enough to add a strange sense of rhythm to the chaos. You take another step forward and nearly collide with a goat. The animal looks up at you with mild annoyance, chewing thoughtfully on a piece of straw, as if wondering why you interrupted its evening stroll through the room. It wanders lazily past your legs and disappears beneath one of the tables where a group of men are deep into a card game. No one seems particularly surprised by the goat's presence. In fact, several customers step casually aside to avoid tripping over it. Animals inside buildings are common in medieval cities. Cats roam freely to keep mice under control. Dogs guard entrances and patrol the streets, and the occasional goat or chicken wanders indoors whenever it pleases. Sure enough, you notice two cats curled together near the hearth, where the warmth from the fire has created the most comfortable spot in the room. One of them opens a single eye briefly before deciding that nothing interesting is happening and returns to sleep. A dog lies stretched across the floor near the door, its ears twitching occasionally as people step over it on their way in and out. Judging by the relaxed way it occupies the entrance, it likely belongs here and has grown accustomed to the constant traffic. The brothel door opens again behind you, sending another wave of cold air into the room, along with two new guests who stamp their boots heavily to shake off the mud. The hinges groan once more before the door closes, sealing the warmth inside again. Watching it for a moment, you begin to understand why people say, the door to a place like this never really closes. It swings open and shut all night long as travelers arrive, customers leave, and workers step outside briefly for air before returning to the crowded warmth. Near the center of the room stands a wide wooden table where several women gather between conversations with guests. They speak quietly among themselves while keeping an eye on the rest of the room, occasionally laughing at some private joke before drifting off again toward waiting customers. Their dresses are simple but colorful enough to stand out in the dim candlelight. The fabrics are worn but carefully maintained, patched and mended in ways that suggest long use rather than luxury. Every movement in the room seems part of a familiar routine. Workers glide between tables, customers gesture for more ale. The dog occasionally lifts its head to watch the door before settling back down again. The music continues softly in the background while the fire crackles in the hearth. Despite the noise and chaos, there is an odd sense of order to it all. The brothel operates like a small ecosystem where everyone understands their role. Guests know where to sit and how to ask for what they want. Workers know how to navigate the room without interrupting the delicate balance between conversation, negotiation, and entertainment. Even the animals seem to know exactly where they belong. You pause for a moment near the door, letting the warmth settle into your clothes and the noise wash over you. Outside the alley was cold, dark, and unpleasant. Inside the brothel, everything is crowded, smoky, and chaotic, yet strangely alive. Candles flicker against the wooden beams overhead, while laughter rises again from one of the tables near the hearth. The door creaks open behind you once more, and another pair of travelers step inside from the night air. The door never really closes here. It simply keeps opening again and again, feeding the endless motion of the room as the long medieval night continues. At first, it is easy to assume that the brothel runs itself. The room is loud, chaotic, and constantly shifting. Customers arrive, others leave, mugs clatter, coins exchange hands, and workers move through the crowd with the practiced rhythm of people who have done this many nights before. Conversations overlap in every corner. A soldier laughs too loudly. A merchant argues about the price of wine. Somewhere near the hearth, the goat has decided that the straw scattered across the floor is worth investigating. From the outside, it appears to be a place ruled by noise and chance rather than structure. But if you stand quietly for a moment and watch the room carefully, you begin to notice something else. Beneath the noise, beneath the laughter and the movement and the smoke, there is a pattern. People shift slightly when certain footsteps approach. Conversations pause briefly when a particular voice speaks. A few customers straighten their posture without realizing it. Even the workers glance in the same direction when someone crosses the floor. The madam has entered the room. She does not announce herself with shouting or dramatic gestures. In fact, the most surprising thing about her entrance is how calm it appears. She simply steps out from a small side doorway near the back of the room, adjusting the sleeves of her dress as she walks. Yet within seconds, the atmosphere around her subtly changes. It is not fear exactly, but something close to it. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of authority. The madam of a medieval brothel is not merely the owner of the building. She is the center around which everything in this place turns. She moves through the room with slow, deliberate confidence, her eyes scanning the space the way a ship captain might study the horizon during a storm. Nothing escapes her attention. She notices which tables are nearly empty and which customers have been waiting too long. She notices when a mug needs refilling or when two men are speaking with slightly too much tension in their voices. She notices the soldier near the hearth who has begun drinking faster than his companions, and she quietly signals to one of the workers to keep an eye on him. Her dress is not luxurious, but it is noticeably better made than the clothes worn by most of the workers. The fabric is thicker, the stitching stronger, the colors slightly richer. It is the clothing of someone who has achieved a certain level of success without ever forgetting how difficult it was to get there. Her hair is pulled back neatly, and around her waist hangs a small leather pouch tied securely with a cord. Inside that pouch, among other things, is the small collection of keys that allow her to control nearly every door in the building. But the most important object she carries is not visible at the moment. It rests somewhere in the private room behind the main hall, the ledger. In a medieval brothel, the ledger is more powerful than any sword or law. It contains the entire life of the house written in careful lines of ink, names of workers, amounts owed, money earned, costs of food, candles, repairs, and bribes paid to local officials who prefer to look the other way when this establishment continues operating after curfew. Every coin that enters or leaves the brothel is recorded in that book, and the madam knows its contents with remarkable accuracy. She pauses beside a table where a merchant is carefully counting his coins. Without raising her voice, she says something quietly to him. The merchant looks up, surprised at first, then slightly embarrassed. Apparently he had been attempting to negotiate a lower price than what had already been agreed upon earlier in the evening. The madam listens patiently for a moment, then gives a brief nod and repeats the number again. Not louder, just clearer. The merchant sighs and adds 2 more coins to the table. The negotiation is finished. She continues walking. Near the hearth, a pair of soldiers have begun arguing about something that may soon become a fight. Their voices rise sharply, and one of them slams his mug down hard enough to spill ale across the table. Several nearby guests glance over nervously. This kind of argument can turn into trouble very quickly. The madam arrives beside them before the argument has time to grow. She places one hand on the table between them and says something calmly, her tone firm but not aggressive. Whatever she says works immediately. The soldiers fall silent, glance at each other, and then mutter a few apologetic words before returning to their drinks. Violence is bad for business. Broken furniture costs money. Injured customers stop paying. Angry authorities might arrive asking questions nobody wants to answer. The madam understands all of this, and she keeps the peace not with threats, but with a reputation built over years of managing situations exactly like this one. She moves again, this time toward the center table where several workers had been speaking earlier. One of them approaches her quietly, whispering something that seems to involve a customer waiting upstairs. The madam listens carefully, nods once, and gives a short set of instructions. The worker disappears up the stairs a moment later, clearly understanding exactly what needs to be done. Running a brothel in the medieval world requires more than simply providing rooms and companionship. It requires constant management of people, personalities, and unpredictable situations. Customers arrive drunk, impatient, or sometimes dangerous. Workers become tired, frustrated, or occasionally ill. Supplies run low, candles burn out, someone forgets to pay their tab, someone else insists they already did. All of these problems eventually reach the same person, the madam. She notices you standing near the door now, observing the room with the quiet curiosity of someone new to the building. Her gaze settles on you briefly, sharp but not unfriendly. It is the look of someone who has spent many years judging strangers quickly. For a moment, she studies your posture, your clothes, the way you watch the room rather than immediately joining the crowd. Then she nods politely, as if acknowledging your presence in the same way she might greet any other customer entering the house. It is a small gesture, but it carries meaning. You have been seen. In this building, nothing truly escapes her attention. Across the room, the lute player begins another soft tune, while one of the workers laughs at a joke told by a merchant who has clearly decided the evening is going well. The goat wanders past the hearth again, still searching for something interesting to eat. The dog near the door shifts slightly, but does not bother opening its eyes. And in the center of it all, the madam continues her quiet patrol of the room. She checks the tables, counts the mugs, observes the mood of the guests, and occasionally exchanges a few quick words with the workers passing through the crowd. Every movement is efficient. Every glance carries purpose. The brothel may look chaotic to an outsider, but under her watch it functions with surprising precision. Coins will be counted correctly tonight. Arguments will be ended before they become fights. Customers will leave satisfied enough to return again tomorrow. And by the time the candles burn low, and the last guest finally staggers out into the muddy street, the madam will return to her private room with the ledger book waiting on the table. There, she will record the evening's business line by line in careful handwriting. Because in this house of smoke, laughter, and constant motion, one truth remains quietly obvious. The brothel does not belong to the building. It belongs to the woman who runs it. At first glance, the brothel feels like a place where rules could not possibly exist. The room is crowded, the air is thick with smoke and laughter, and strangers move through the space with the restless energy of people who have traveled long distances and intend to enjoy themselves before the night ends. Voices rise, mugs clatter against tables, and the floor creaks constantly beneath heavy boots. To someone standing near the door for the first time, it might seem like a building that runs entirely on chaos. But places like this survive only because chaos is carefully controlled. Behind the laughter and noise lies a quiet framework of rules that every person inside the building understands, even if no one bothers to announce them out loud. The rules are not written on a sign beside the door. There is no polite list painted neatly on the wall. Instead, they exist in the memory of the madam and the workers who enforce them with practiced ease. Anyone who spends enough time here learns them quickly. Some of the rules are obvious, while others reveal themselves only after someone breaks them and receives a sharp reminder from the person in charge. The first and most important rule is simple: no fighting. Arguments are expected in a place where alcohol flows freely and pride travels in heavy boots, but actual violence is unacceptable. A fight inside the brothel can break furniture, frighten customers, and attract the attention of city guards who might prefer to close the building entirely rather than deal with repeated disturbances. For this reason, the madam treats even the smallest hint of aggression as something that must be addressed immediately. If voices begin to rise too sharply, someone will step between the arguing men and calm the situation before it has time to grow. If a customer becomes too drunk to listen to reason, the large dog resting near the door suddenly finds a reason to stand up and move closer. In extreme cases, a man might simply be escorted outside and left in the alley to reconsider his behavior under the cold night air. Most customers understand the message quickly. Inside the brothel, peace is part of the service. The second rule is one that every merchant in the room learns quickly: no credit. Coins must appear before services are provided, not after. Medieval cities are full of travelers who promise payment tomorrow and disappear before sunrise. The madam has seen every version of this story before, and she has no interest in hearing it again. Payment happens immediately, and the ledger will record exactly what was given. Customers who attempt to negotiate after the fact rarely succeed. The brothel is not a charity, and its survival depends on careful accounting. Another rule becomes clear as the night grows louder: no free services. This may seem obvious, but some guests attempt to rely on charm rather than coin. They tell elaborate stories about their importance, about the business they will bring in the future, about favors they might grant later. The madam listens patiently to such speeches when they occur, but her answer rarely changes. Charm is pleasant, but it does not pay for candles, food, repairs, or wages. If a customer wishes to remain in the building, the rules of business apply just as they would in any marketplace. Some rules are more unusual, though they make perfect sense when viewed through the lens of experience. One of these involves singing. Early in the evening, the brothel is filled with music and laughter. The lute player strums gentle melodies near the hearth, and occasionally someone begins singing a familiar tavern song. These moments are welcome, while the room is lively and the candles burn brightly. But as the night deepens and some guests become louder than others, a quieter rule begins to emerge: no singing after midnight. The reason is simple: loud songs attract attention from outside the building, and attention is something the brothel prefers to avoid. City authorities are willing to tolerate certain businesses within the red light district, but that tolerance disappears quickly if the entire neighborhood begins complaining about drunken choruses echoing through the streets. So as midnight approaches, the music softens. The lute may continue playing quietly, but enthusiastic singers are gently discouraged from continuing their performances. Then there is the rule that sounds almost ridiculous until you understand how necessary it is. Absolutely no stealing the soap. Soap, in the medieval world, is not an inexpensive convenience. It is a valuable item made through a laborious process involving fats and ashes. A brothel uses large amounts of it to keep the house at least somewhat presentable, and replacing stolen bars would quickly become expensive. For this reason, the madam guards the soap supply with surprising seriousness. Workers know exactly how much is stored in the washing area, and customers who attempt to leave with more than they arrived with will receive a firm reminder that cleanliness is welcome, but theft is not. Beyond these specific rules lies a larger expectation that shapes behavior inside the brothel. Respect the house. This means respecting the workers, the furniture, and the general atmosphere that allows the business to continue operating. Customers who damage property will pay for it. Customers who insult workers too aggressively will find themselves speaking with the madam sooner rather than later. And customers who behave in ways that threaten the stability of the house may find that the door opens for them in a direction they did not expect. The workers themselves follow rules as well. They keep track of their assigned rooms, their schedules, and the customers they are speaking with. They report unusual situations quickly rather than trying to manage them alone. They understand the quiet signals the madam uses when something in the room needs attention. Over time, these small habits create a network of awareness that keeps the building functioning smoothly even when dozens of people move through it during a single evening. Watching the room now, you begin to see how these rules operate almost invisibly. A man who raises his voice too loudly finds a worker placing a calming hand on his arm before the argument escalates. A customer who tries to delay payment is politely redirected toward the table where coins are counted. A musician who begins singing too enthusiastically notices the madam's raised eyebrow and lowers his voice immediately. None of these moments require shouting or dramatic confrontation. The rules exist quietly, enforced through reputation and habit rather than written law. Even the animals seem to understand the boundaries of the house. The goat wanders freely but avoids the tables where food is being served. The cats remain near the hearth where warmth is plentiful and mice occasionally appear. The dog near the door watches new arrivals with calm patience, rising only when necessary. In a building filled with strangers, alcohol, and unpredictable emotions, these rules form the invisible skeleton that holds everything together. Without them, the brothel would collapse into disorder within a single evening. Customers would argue over prices, workers would become overwhelmed, and the authorities might arrive with unpleasant questions. The madam knows this better than anyone. Her experience has taught her that the difference between a successful house and a disastrous one is often nothing more than the ability to enforce simple rules consistently. So while the room continues buzzing with laughter, music, and quiet negotiations, those rules remain quietly in place. No fighting, no credit, no free services, no singing after midnight, and under no circumstances does anyone leave the building with the soap. They may seem like small rules, even amusing ones, but they are the reason the brothel continues to function night after night. In a world where chaos waits patiently outside the door, order inside the house is not optional. It is the foundation that allows the business, the workers, and the customers to survive another long medieval evening together. If you spend enough time inside the brothel, watching the room, instead of simply listening to the noise, you eventually begin noticing details that the candlelight hides at first glance. One of those details is clothing. At a distance, especially through the flicker of smoke and shadow, the workers appear colorful and lively. Dresses move through the room in shades of red, blue, and green. Scarves drape across shoulders. Sleeves swing gently as women carry mugs between tables. To someone who has only seen paintings or modern films about the Middle Ages, it might almost resemble the romantic image often imagined: flowing garments, bright fabrics, and an atmosphere of theatrical elegance. But the longer you watch, the more the illusion begins to fade. Medieval brothel clothing is not glamorous. It is practical, heavily worn, and constantly repaired. Most of the workers here wear simple linen shifts beneath outer dresses made of wool. Linen is the fabric closest to the skin because it is lighter and easier to wash than wool, though even linen garments are rarely washed as often as someone from the modern world might expect. Water must be carried by hand, soap is valuable, and laundry requires time that busy workers rarely have during the active hours of the night. As a result, linen garments are used for as long as possible before they are replaced, patched, or handed down to someone else. The outer dresses are made from wool because wool is durable and warm. Medieval buildings are rarely well insulated, and the brothel grows cold quickly once the fire burns low. Wool retains heat even when damp, which makes it useful for people who spend their evenings moving between warm rooms and drafty corridors. Yet durability does not mean comfort. Wool can be heavy, itchy, and difficult to keep clean, especially in a crowded environment filled with smoke, spilled ale, and muddy boots. The dresses you see moving through the brothel tonight have likely been repaired many times. Small patches appear along sleeves and hems where fabric has thinned from wear. Some dresses show faint stitching in slightly different colors, where torn cloth was carefully replaced rather than discarded. Fabric is expensive, and throwing away a garment simply because it is worn would be unthinkable for most people living in this century. Instead, clothing survives through endless cycles of repair. Many garments inside the brothel have lived previous lives before arriving here. A dress might once have belonged to a merchant's wife before it was sold second-hand to a tailor, altered, and eventually purchased cheaply by someone working in a place like this. Another might have been handed down through several owners before reaching its current wearer. Clothing in the medieval world moves through society in long chains of reuse. Color is another illusion that reveals itself with closer attention. Some dresses appear bright under candlelight, but the colors are rarely as vivid as they might first seem. Natural dyes fade quickly with washing and wear. Reds dull into brownish tones. Blues soften toward gray. Greens become muted olive shades. The result is clothing that once may have been lively, but now carries the quiet exhaustion of long use. Accessories are simple and practical. Many workers wear belts made from narrow strips of leather used to carry small pouches containing coins, sewing needles, or personal items. Some tuck handkerchiefs into these belts, useful for wiping hands or faces during long evenings. A few women wear modest ribbons or scarves tied loosely around their hair, partly decorative but mostly functional for keeping loose strands out of the way. Hair itself is often tied back rather than styled elaborately. Contrary to the dramatic hairstyles sometimes shown in modern depictions of medieval life, most working women keep their hair simple and contained. Loose hair catches fire easily when candles and hearths fill a room, and it also provides a convenient place for dust and smoke to settle during long hours indoors. And then there are the realities that people rarely include when imagining medieval clothing: lice and fleas. In crowded environments where people live, work, and sleep close together, small insects are nearly impossible to eliminate completely. Lice hide in seams of fabric, especially in garments worn close to the skin. Fleas travel easily between animals, bedding, and clothing. The brothel, like most buildings in the city, hosts its share of both. Workers manage these problems as best they can. Combs are used regularly to remove lice from hair. Garments are occasionally heated near fires to drive out insects hiding in the seams. Cats roaming the building help control mice, which in turn reduces the number of fleas carried by rodents. But none of these measures create perfect cleanliness. They only keep the problem from growing worse. Even the straw scattered across the floor serves more than one purpose. While it helps absorb spilled drinks and mud, it also provides a surface that can be replaced regularly, carrying away some of the insects and dirt that accumulate during busy nights. By morning, much of the old straw will be swept away and replaced with fresh bundles. The smell of clothing inside the brothel tells its own story. Wool carries the scent of smoke easily, and linen absorbs sweat during long hours of work. Add in the perfumes used by some workers, often made from herbs or flower oils diluted heavily to stretch their use, and the air becomes a complicated mixture of fragrances, both pleasant and unpleasant. Yet despite all these hardships, the workers still make efforts to maintain some sense of appearance. A ribbon might be tied carefully at the collar, a patch might be sewn neatly rather than roughly, a scarf might be adjusted so that its faded color catches the candlelight in a flattering way. These small details create the impression of brightness in a place where luxury is rare. From across the room, a new visitor might still see the colorful movement of dresses and assume elegance where there is only practicality. The flickering candles help create this illusion. Light hides worn seams and faded dyes, while shadows soften the rough edges of everyday life. But the truth of medieval brothel clothing is much simpler and far less glamorous. These garments are tools, not costumes. They protect against cold, allow movement through crowded rooms, and survive the endless wear of long nights spent working among strangers. A worker passing nearby adjusts her sleeve briefly, smoothing the fabric where a careful patch holds two pieces of cloth together. The stitches are small and precise, the work of someone who has repaired clothing many times before. The dress itself may have seen years of use, but the repair ensures it will last a little longer. In the medieval world, clothing rarely tells a story of luxury. More often, it tells a story of survival, adaptation, and quiet resourcefulness. Inside the brothel tonight, every thread, every patch, and every faded color carries evidence of the long journey these garments have taken before arriving in this smoky room full of laughter, candlelight, and restless shadows. You step further into the room and begin to notice something that at first feels like background noise, but slowly becomes impossible to ignore: the constant, shifting flow of people. The brothel is not just a place, it is a crossroads, a strange intersection where the city empties out its most restless, most secretive, and most unpredictable visitors. No two customers are quite the same, and yet, over time, patterns begin to emerge. You start to recognize them not as individuals, but as types, each carrying their own habits, expectations, and very particular problems through the same narrow doorway. The merchants are often the first you learn to identify, not because they are quiet, but because they rarely are. They arrive smelling faintly of travel, dust, leather, spices, and sometimes the lingering scent of whatever goods they have been transporting. Their hands are calloused but careful, fingers used to counting coins and measuring value in everything they touch. They speak in numbers even when they are not discussing business, always negotiating, always calculating, always trying to determine if what they are receiving is worth what they are giving. They tend to linger, not out of leisure, but because they are accustomed to stretching every interaction into something more profitable, more efficient, more worthwhile. Conversations with them can feel like transactions even when no money is being exchanged, and they often leave behind not just coins, but opinions, complaints, and unsolicited advice about how everything, from the price of wine to the stitching on a dress, could be improved. Then there are the soldiers, and their presence changes the air almost immediately. They arrive louder, heavier, carrying with them the sharp scent of sweat, metal, and long days spent outdoors. Their boots track in mud and straw. Their laughter is too loud, their movements slightly unsteady even before the drinking begins. Some are young, still trying to prove something to themselves or to each other, while others carry a quiet exhaustion that settles into the corners of their eyes. They are used to orders, to structure, to clear hierarchies, and yet inside the brothel, those lines blur in ways that make them uneasy. Some become overly jovial, clinging to humor as a way to navigate unfamiliar territory, while others grow tense, quick to irritation, as though waiting for a command that will never come. They spend freely when they have coin and become restless when they do not, and their presence often requires careful management, a balance between keeping them entertained and preventing small frustrations from turning into something much more difficult to control. The clergy are perhaps the most complicated of all, not because they stand out, but because they try so hard not to. They arrive quietly, often later in the evening, cloaked not just in fabric, but in hesitation. Their clothing marks them immediately to anyone paying attention, even when they attempt to conceal it, and yet no one openly acknowledges it. There is an unspoken agreement within the room that certain things will not be pointed out, certain identities will not be named. They speak softly, avoid eye contact at first, and carry with them the faint scent of incense mixed with the more ordinary smells of the city. Their presence brings with it a strange tension, not loud or disruptive, but persistent, like a thread woven through the fabric of the evening. They often seem divided between two versions of themselves, one that belongs to the outside world, and one that exists only within these walls, and the effort of maintaining that separation is visible in the way they move, the way they speak, the way they leave, quickly, quietly, as though hoping not to be remembered. Travelers are easier to recognize, though no less varied. They come from elsewhere, and that difference clings to them in subtle ways. The cut of their clothing, the rhythm of their speech, the unfamiliar patterns in their behavior. Some are curious, eager to observe, to ask questions, to understand the strange little ecosystem they have stepped into. Others are simply tired, seeking rest more than anything else, their movements slow, their voices low, their attention drifting. They carry stories with them, fragments of distant places that surface in conversation, offering brief glimpses into worlds beyond the city's walls. And yet, for all their differences, they share a certain detachment, a sense that this place is temporary, a stop along a longer journey, something to be experienced and then left behind without consequence. Nobles, when they come, rarely arrive as themselves. They move through the doorway with a kind of practiced caution, dressed in ways that attempt to blend in but never quite succeed. There is something in their posture, in the way they hold themselves, in the subtle expectation that space will be made for them, that reveals more than their clothing conceals. They speak carefully, choosing their words with precision, aware that every interaction carries a risk, not of physical danger, but of exposure. Their presence alters the room in quieter ways than the soldiers, but no less significantly. Conversations shift, attention sharpens, and the madam's watchful eye becomes even more focused. They are not just customers, they are variables, unpredictable and potentially consequential, and everyone understands, without needing to say it, that they must be handled with a particular kind of care. And then there are the regulars, the ones who belong to the city in the same way the brothel does. They arrive without ceremony, slipping into familiar places, greeting familiar faces, moving through the space as though it were an extension of their own homes. Their presence is steady, predictable, almost comforting in its consistency. They know the rhythms of the house, the rules both spoken and unspoken, and they rarely disrupt the balance. They bring with them the everyday concerns of the city, small grievances, local gossip, the quiet accumulation of ordinary frustrations, and in doing so, they anchor the brothel to the world outside its walls. They are a reminder that, for all its peculiarities, this place is not separate from the city, but deeply intertwined with it. As the night unfolds, these different groups begin to overlap, to interact, to create a shifting mosaic of personalities and intentions. A merchant might find himself in conversation with a traveler, comparing routes and prices, while a soldier listens in, offering opinions shaped by entirely different experiences. A member of the clergy might sit quietly at the edge of the room, observing, while a regular moves comfortably between conversations, weaving connections that others do not even notice. The brothel becomes less a collection of individuals and more a kind of living system, each person influencing the atmosphere in small but cumulative ways. And with each new arrival, the balance shifts again, subtly but unmistakably. A door opens, a draft of cooler air moves through the room, and another figure steps inside, carrying with them a new set of expectations, a new set of needs, a new set of complications. The night does not progress in a straight line, but in waves, each one reshaping this space just enough to keep it from ever settling into stillness. You begin to understand that this place is not defined by its walls, or its furniture, or even its rules, but by the constant flow of people moving through it. Each customer leaves something behind, not just coins, but traces of themselves, fragments of conversation, lingering impressions that fade slowly, but never completely disappear. And as you stand there, watching, listening, breathing, in the dense, layered air of the room, you realize that the brothel is less a destination and more a passage, a place where the city gathers, briefly reveals itself, and then moves on, leaving the night to continue without pause. When you first step inside the brothel, the warm air and candlelight distract you from noticing something else that becomes impossible to ignore after a few minutes. The complicated reality of cleanliness. The medieval world does not share modern ideas about hygiene, and crowded buildings like this one make that reality even more noticeable. The room smells of smoke, wool, ale, damp leather, and bodies that have spent the entire day working, traveling, or riding horses before finally arriving here. It is not exactly unbearable, but it is unmistakably human in a way that would surprise anyone accustomed to modern standards of washing and fresh clothing. Yet despite what many people assume, medieval people are not completely indifferent to cleanliness. They simply manage it in ways that look very different from what you might expect. The brothel does not have private bathrooms or neatly tiled washrooms hidden behind doors. Instead, washing takes place in a more communal and practical manner. Somewhere deeper inside the building, there is a small room containing several large wooden barrels filled with water. These barrels serve as bathtubs, washing stations, and sometimes even laundry containers, depending on what the house needs at that moment. The water inside them is not constantly replaced, because hauling fresh water through city streets is difficult work. Instead, the barrels are refilled gradually throughout the evening whenever someone has time to carry more buckets from the well. By the end of a busy night, the water often looks less like a bath and more like a cloudy soup made of soap residue, dirt, and the dust of a dozen travelers. The process of bathing itself is simple. A person dips a cloth or sponge into the water and scrubs whatever parts of the body need attention. Sometimes workers will help one another wash their hair or backs, sharing the limited space around the barrels while trying to finish quickly before the next person arrives. Privacy is not considered especially important here. In a building where nearly every room contains strangers, the act of washing becomes just another practical task completed whenever time allows. Soap exists, but it is not the inexpensive bar that might sit beside a modern sink. Medieval soap is usually made from animal fat combined with ashes or alkaline salts. The result is effective but harsh, often leaving the skin dry and slightly irritated after use. Because making soap requires time and resources, it is treated carefully rather than used freely. Small chunks are kept in storage and distributed only when necessary. This explains the strict rule you heard earlier about stealing it. A missing bar of soap is not just a minor inconvenience. It represents money lost and effort wasted. Since soap is limited and water is difficult to transport, people rely heavily on other strategies to manage unpleasant smells. One of the most common solutions is perfume. Inside the brothel, you may have already noticed the faint, sweet scent drifting through the smoke. That fragrance comes from oils made using flowers, herbs, or spices mixed into small amounts of alcohol or fat. These perfumes are rarely subtle. In fact, they are often quite strong, applied generously to clothing or skin in the hope of masking less pleasant odors beneath them. The result is a strange layering of smells that defines the atmosphere of the room. You might catch a sudden hint of lavender or rose oil as someone passes by, only to have it quickly blend with the scent of wood smoke and wool. Occasionally, another aroma appears, crushed herbs tucked into a belt pouch or sewn into the lining of clothing. These small bundles release fragrance slowly over time, acting as portable attempts at freshness. Hair presents its own challenges. Medieval people washed their hair less frequently than modern individuals, partly because water is heavy to carry, and partly because drying long hair without heated rooms takes considerable time. Instead, many workers keep their hair tied back and comb it regularly with fine combs designed to remove dust and insects. Combing hair carefully serves both cosmetic and practical purposes, keeping it manageable while reducing the presence of lice that sometimes travel easily through crowded environments. Clothing also plays a role in managing hygiene. The linen garments worn closest to the skin can be removed and washed more easily than heavy wool dresses. These undergarments absorb sweat during long evenings of work and can be rinsed when time allows, though even this task is not performed daily. Washing requires heating water, scrubbing fabric by hand, and finding space where garments can dry without collecting more dust than they already contain. Despite these efforts, the reality remains that crowded medieval spaces rarely smell clean in the modern sense. Bodies work hard throughout the day, traveling on foot or horseback through muddy streets before arriving indoors. Fires burn constantly for warmth and cooking, filling rooms with smoke that clings to hair and clothing. Animals wander through the same spaces where people eat and sleep. The brothel is no exception. In fact, it may experience even heavier traffic than many other buildings in the district. Occasionally, someone attempts a more complete bath. In some cities, public bathhouses operate where people can pay a small fee to sit in large, heated pools of water. These establishments are popular gathering places where socializing and washing happen at the same time. However, not everyone has the money or time to visit them regularly. Workers in a brothel often rely on the simpler washing barrels inside the building instead. Even those barrels offer moments of relief. After several hours spent moving through smoky rooms, the feeling of cool water on the skin can be refreshing. Workers may wash their hands and faces between customers, smoothing their hair afterward and adjusting their clothes before returning to the main room. These small rituals help maintain a sense of order and dignity in a place where the pace of work rarely slows. Perfume once again becomes the final step before stepping back into the crowd. A few drops applied to the wrists or neck create the impression of freshness, even if the effort behind it has been modest. From across the room, the effect works well enough. The flickering candlelight and shifting shadows hide the details that close inspection might reveal. Watching the room now, you can see how everyone participates in this delicate balancing act between cleanliness and practicality. A merchant wipes his hands carefully with a cloth after eating. A worker adjusts her hair with a comb tucked into her belt. Someone near the hearth lifts a mug of ale while discreetly applying a small dab of scented oil behind his ears. None of these actions create perfect hygiene, but together they form a system that allows people to function in crowded environments without becoming completely overwhelmed by discomfort. Medieval life is full of compromises like this. Cleanliness exists, but it must share space with the realities of labor, travel, and limited resources. And so the brothel continues its nightly routine. The bath barrels will eventually be emptied and refilled. The soap will be guarded carefully until the next washing. Perfume will drift through the smoky air in waves as workers move between tables. It may not resemble the polished cleanliness of later centuries, but within the context of the medieval city, This is simply how people manage life in close quarters. As the night inside the brothel continues and the rhythm of customers, drinks, and negotiations settles into a steady pattern, it is easy to forget that the people working here do not simply disappear when the candles burn low. Eventually, the music fades, the last mugs are emptied, and the door opens one final time to release the final customer back into the cold alley. Only then does the second half of brothel life begin, the part that involves rest, or at least something close enough to it to count as sleep. If you imagine quiet private rooms with feather beds and thick blankets, you will quickly discover that the reality is something quite different. The sleeping arrangements inside a medieval brothel are practical, crowded, and very rarely peaceful. Space inside city buildings is valuable, and the house must devote most of its usable rooms to business during the evening hours. When the night is over, those same rooms are rearranged into temporary sleeping spaces for the workers. Privacy is a luxury few people here expect. Instead, bedrooms are shared in ways that would feel almost impossible to anyone accustomed to modern ideas of personal space. Climb the narrow wooden staircase near the back of the main room, and you will reach the upper floor where several doors line a dim hallway. The boards creak loudly beneath each step, announcing every movement to anyone already upstairs. The air here smells slightly different from the smoky hall below. There is still the scent of candles and wood, but now it mixes with the heavier smell of straw bedding, wool blankets, and the lingering warmth of bodies that have already settled down to sleep. Push open one of the doors, and the room beyond quickly explains why rest here can be a challenge. Instead of a single bed placed neatly against the wall, the floor is filled with several low wooden frames holding mattresses stuffed with straw. Straw is the most common filling for bedding in the medieval world. It is inexpensive, easy to replace, and surprisingly comfortable for a short time when it is fresh. Unfortunately, straw mattresses rarely remain fresh for long. They flatten under the weight of sleepers and eventually gather dust, insects, and whatever else drifts through the air of a busy household. Each mattress is large enough for one person if they stretch out carefully, though it is not unusual for two people to share when space becomes tight. Blankets, made from rough wool, are folded nearby, ready to provide warmth once the fire downstairs begins to fade. In winter months, these blankets become essential, as upper floors in timber buildings lose heat quickly once the night grows cold. But the mattresses are only part of the story. Along the wall near the window sits a wooden chest containing clothing and small personal belongings belonging to several workers at once. Shoes are scattered beside it in a small pile, muddy from the evening's work. A bucket stands in one corner to serve practical purposes that are better not examined too closely in the dim candlelight. And then there are the animals. If you listen carefully for a moment, you will hear the faint rustling sound of feathers somewhere beneath one of the beds. A chicken has decided that the straw mattress offers a convenient place to sleep as well. Chickens wander freely through many medieval homes because they are useful animals that provide eggs and occasionally meat. When the doors close for the night, they simply settle wherever they happen to be standing. The goat you saw earlier downstairs occasionally makes its way upstairs too. Its hooves clatter softly across the wooden floor as it searches for any stray bits of food that might have been dropped during the evening. Once satisfied, it may curl up near the door or beside a bed where the warmth of sleeping bodies provides comfort. Cats sometimes wander through the rooms as well, continuing their quiet patrol for mice that hide among the straw bedding and wooden beams. Their presence is tolerated because they serve a valuable purpose, even if they occasionally decide that someone's blanket is the perfect place to nap. All of this means that the concept of a silent bedroom is almost non-existent here. Even when the workers manage to lie down and close their eyes, the building continues making small noises around them. The straw mattresses rustle whenever someone turns over. The wooden beams creak softly as the building settles. Chickens shift in their sleep, feathers brushing against the straw, And of course, there is the snoring. After long hours spent working in crowded rooms, many people fall asleep quickly and deeply. The result is a chorus of snores that fills the small bedroom like the low rumble of distant thunder. One worker snores softly with each breath, while another produces sharp bursts of sound that echo off the walls. Someone near the window mutters occasionally in their sleep, perhaps dreaming about the endless conversations of the evening. Trying to fall asleep in such an environment requires patience. Some workers wrap cloth around their heads or pull blankets over their ears to block the noise. Others simply grow accustomed to it over time, learning to sleep through sounds that would wake a newcomer instantly. Privacy, meanwhile, remains a rare luxury. Changing clothes happens quickly with backs turned politely away from one another. Conversations drift between beds as people unwind from the long night. Stories are exchanged about difficult customers, amusing accidents, or rumors overheard downstairs. Laughter occasionally breaks out even as people try to settle into sleep. Despite the cramped conditions, there is also a strange sense of community in these shared rooms. The workers rely on one another, not only during the busy hours of the evening, but also during these quieter moments afterward. A blanket might be shared if someone is cold. A whispered joke might ease the tension of a difficult night. Someone might rise briefly to adjust the window shutter if the wind grows too strong. Eventually, the conversations fade, one by one, until the room grows quieter. The last candle is extinguished, leaving only faint moonlight slipping through the narrow window. Outside, the city continues its restless movement in distant streets. But inside the brothel, the upper floor finally settles into something resembling rest. The straw mattresses creak softly as people shift positions. The goat exhales a slow breath near the door. A chicken flutters briefly before settling deeper into the straw beneath the bed. And somewhere in the darkness, one particularly enthusiastic snorer continues providing the only reminder that sleep here is rarely peaceful. In a place built for business rather than comfort, the workers take what rest they can find. It may not be luxurious, and it may not be quiet, but for those who spend their nights navigating the chaos of the brothel below, even a few hours of sleep on a straw mattress shared with chickens and goats can feel like a small victory before the next evening begins again. Once the brothel is fully awake for the evening, time inside the building begins to behave differently from the rest of the city. Outside, the night moves gradually toward dawn, guided by the ringing of distant bells and the slow dimming of lanterns in the streets. Inside the brothel, however, the hours blur together into something that feels almost endless. Candles burn low and are replaced. Mugs are filled, emptied, and filled again. Conversations begin, drift into laughter, dissolve into arguments, and then start all over again as new customers arrive through the door. For the workers moving constantly through the room, the entire night becomes a long shifting current of activity that rarely pauses long enough for anyone to stand still. The lamps and candles scattered around the room create a restless kind of light. Flames tremble each time the door opens, and a breath of cold air sweeps across the floor. The shadows they cast move constantly across the wooden beams of the ceiling and the uneven walls of plaster. Faces appear briefly in the glow of the candles, and then disappear again into smoke and dim corners. In some places, the light gathers warmly around tables where guests sit drinking and laughing, while other parts of the room remain half hidden, lit only by the dull glow of the hearth. Coins provide another kind of rhythm to the night. Every few minutes, the quiet clink of metal touches the air as customers pay for another drink or settle an agreement made at the table. Sometimes the coins are dropped carelessly, producing a sharp ringing sound when they strike the wooden surface. At other times, they are counted carefully, one by one, with the deliberate patience of someone who wants to be certain nothing is missing. The workers have learned to hear the difference between those sounds. A careless drop often means the customer has been drinking heavily and may soon become difficult. Slow counting usually means negotiation is underway. Music weaves itself through the noise as well. The lute player near the hearth changes melodies often, shifting between quiet tunes that encourage conversation and livelier rhythms that tempt someone to sing along. Occasionally, a guest begins a familiar tavern song, and for a moment, several voices join together in rough harmony. The music is rarely perfect, but it fills the room with an energy that keeps the night moving forward. For the workers, this is when the real labor begins. Early in the evening, the room is only half full, and there is time to walk slowly between tables, speaking casually with customers and learning their moods. As the night deepens, however, the brothel grows crowded. The door swings open again and again, admitting travelers who have finally finished their business elsewhere in the city. Merchants arrive after closing their shops. Soldiers wander in groups, their boots loud on the wooden floor. Even a few locals appear, who claim they are only stopping for a quick drink, but seem in no hurry to leave. Each new arrival brings a different personality into the room. One man might want nothing more than a quiet conversation and a mug of ale. Another might arrive already in the middle of a loud story that he insists on telling everyone within earshot. A pair of travelers might begin arguing about the price of lodging before they even sit down. Someone else may simply collapse into a chair with the exhausted relief of a person who has been walking all day. The workers must navigate all of these personalities at once. A woman carrying a tray of mugs moves carefully between chairs, avoiding the goat that has decided to wander across the floor again. Another leans against a table, speaking softly with a merchant who seems more interested in conversation than in drinking. A third pauses briefly beside the hearth to warm her hands before crossing the room again to greet a group of new arrivals. Every movement requires attention. Drinks must be delivered before customers grow impatient. Conversations must be steered gently away from arguments that might lead to trouble. If two men begin disagreeing too loudly about politics or trade routes, someone quickly changes the subject or offers another round of ale to soften their moods. Sometimes a simple joke is enough to dissolve tension before it becomes serious. Gossip travels quickly through the room during these busy hours. Workers hear fragments of information from nearly every corner of the city. Merchants speak about shortages of grain or rising prices in distant markets. Soldiers share rumors about troop movements and border conflicts. Travelers describe strange events from towns far down the road. All of this information drifts through the brothel like smoke, carried from table to table by voices that grow louder as the night continues. Occasionally, someone raises their voice too sharply, and the entire room seems to pause for a moment. A spilled mug might send ale running across the table while its owner protests loudly about the loss. Two customers may disagree about a card game or a forgotten bet. In those moments, the workers act quickly. A calm word here, a firm look there, and the problem is often resolved before it spreads further. If the situation refuses to calm, the madam appears quietly beside the table, her presence alone enough to remind everyone that the house has rules. Meanwhile, the physical work continues without pause. Empty mugs must be collected and refilled. Plates of food are carried from the kitchen to hungry guests who arrived late. Candles are replaced when their flames shrink too low, and the hearth is fed with more wood to keep the room warm. Even the straw scattered across the floor is occasionally swept aside when it becomes too damp with spilled drink. The hours pass in this steady rhythm of small tasks and shifting conversations. The workers learn to measure time not by bells or clocks, but by the changing moods of the room. Early laughter eventually grows louder and more careless as ale loosens tongues. Later still, some customers become quieter, leaning heavily on the tables as fatigue begins to compete with the excitement of the night. Outside the windows, the city gradually grows darker and quieter. Many homes have already extinguished their lamps, leaving the streets beyond the brothel in shadow. Inside, however, the activity continues almost unchanged. The building glows like a lantern in the night, drawing people who are not yet ready for sleep. At times, the endless movement can feel overwhelming. One worker may barely finish speaking with a customer before another calls for attention from across the room. Someone else may need help settling a disagreement over payment. A traveler might suddenly decide he wants food, even though the kitchen has nearly closed for the evening. Every request arrives as if it is the most urgent matter in the building, yet over time the workers learn to move through the chaos with surprising grace. They remember faces, voices, and habits. They know which customers prefer quiet conversation and which ones will likely begin singing before the night is over. They recognize the moment when a guest has had enough to drink and gently guide him toward the door before trouble begins. And so the night continues. Lamps flicker, coins clink against wood. Laughter echoes from the tables near the hearth, while the lute player begins another melody that drifts softly through the smoky air. The brothel remains alive with movement and sound, a small island of restless energy in a city that is slowly slipping towards sleep. For the workers navigating its crowded rooms, the hours stretch onward in a long, unbroken shift that will not truly end until the first pale light of dawn touches the windows and the final customer stumbles back into the quiet streets. Somewhere behind the main hall of the brothel, past the narrow staircase and a crooked wooden door that never quite closes properly, lies the kitchen. It is not a grand space. In fact, it is surprisingly small for a building that feeds so many people during the long hours of the night. The ceiling is low, the walls are darkened by years of smoke, and the hearth dominates the room like the heart of the house itself. The fire burns almost constantly here, because food in a place like this is less about variety and more about endurance. People must eat, and the simplest way to feed many mouths in a medieval household is to keep one large pot simmering over the fire for as long as possible. Inside that pot is the answer to a question you may not have asked yet, but will soon understand. What does everyone eat here? The answer is pottage. Pottage is not exactly a recipe. It is more of a system. Imagine a stew that never truly ends, a pot that is always cooking, always accepting new ingredients, and rarely emptied completely. At the beginning of the week, it might start as a simple mixture of water, barley, and a handful of vegetables. Over time, more ingredients are added whenever they become available. A cabbage leaf here, a carrot there, perhaps a piece of onion or a bundle of herbs tied together with string. If the brothel has done well that week, someone might even add a small portion of meat, usually pork or beef that has been salted to preserve it. The pot remains over the fire, hour after hour, day after day, thickening slowly as grains swell and vegetables soften into the broth. Each time someone removes a bowlful, more water and fresh ingredients are added to replace what was taken. In this way, the stew evolves constantly. Tonight's meal contains traces of yesterday's dinner and perhaps even flavors that began simmering several days ago. A worker in the kitchen lifts the lid from the pot and stirs it slowly with a wooden spoon that has clearly been used for many years. Steam rises immediately, carrying with it the comforting smell of cooked grains and herbs. It is not a complicated aroma, but after hours spent in the smoky chaos of the main room, it is surprisingly welcome. The brothel kitchen operates with efficiency rather than elegance. There are no delicate recipes written on parchment or chefs debating subtle flavors. Instead, there is a practical understanding of what keeps people full and working through the long night. Pottage provides warmth, energy, and enough substance to satisfy hunger without costing too much to prepare. Along one wall sits a rough wooden table where bread is cut into thick pieces. Bread is just as important as the stew itself. It serves as both food and utensil. Diners tear pieces from the loaf and dip them into the bowl, soaking up the broth before eating the softened bread. Some people even use stale bread as a sort of edible plate called a trencher. The pottage is poured directly onto it, and once the meal is finished, the soggy bread can either be eaten or given to animals waiting nearby. In the brothel, nothing goes to waste if it can be helped. A stack of wooden bowls rests beside the hearth, each one slightly different in shape and size. When a customer or worker asks for food, the kitchen worker ladles pottage into one of these bowls and hands it over along with a piece of bread. There is rarely much ceremony involved. The goal is simply to deliver something hot and filling as quickly as possible. Tonight, the stew contains barley, cabbage, onions, and a few small pieces of pork that must have been added earlier in the day. The pork has nearly disappeared into the broth after hours of cooking, but its flavor lingers in every spoonful. A handful of dried herbs, perhaps parsley or thyme, floats near the surface. If you were expecting spices like pepper or cinnamon, you might be disappointed. Such spices exist in the medieval world, but they are expensive imports carried along distant trade routes. Wealthy households may use them generously, but places like this rely mostly on local herbs that can be gathered or grown nearby. The kitchen itself is busy, but not frantic. A woman stands beside the hearth, stirring the pot occasionally, while another slices bread with a knife worn smooth by years of sharpening. A small window above the table allows smoke to drift outside, though not nearly enough to keep the air clear. The walls carry the permanent scent of cooking fires. A chicken wanders through the doorway and hops onto the floor near a basket of vegetable scraps, pecking curiously at anything that might resemble food. No one bothers to chase it away. Chickens are common visitors in medieval kitchens because they are excellent at cleaning up crumbs that would otherwise attract mice. Hanging from hooks above the hearth are several pieces of meat that have been salted and dried for storage. These cuts will eventually be sliced and added to the pottage when supplies allow. Preservation is important here because fresh meat does not remain edible for long without refrigeration. Salted meat can last for weeks if kept dry. A small pot of water warms near the fire as well, ready to be used for washing bowls or mixing with the stew if it grows too thick. Nothing in this kitchen sits idle for long. Every object has a purpose, and every movement contributes to the quiet rhythm of preparing food for a house that rarely sleeps. From time to time, a worker from the main room pushes open the kitchen door and requests another bowl. The kitchen staff rarely ask many questions. They simply fill the bowl, slice another piece of bread, and send it back out into the noise of the brothel. For the workers themselves, meals are often eaten quickly between tasks. Someone might step into the kitchen, scoop a portion of pottage into a bowl, and swallow several mouthfuls before returning to the crowd downstairs. Sitting quietly for a full meal is a luxury rarely available during the busiest hours of the night. Customers eat in a similar fashion. A bowl of stew appears beside their mug of ale, and they dip bread into it while continuing their conversations. Sometimes the bowl remains untouched until the stew grows cold, because the discussion at the table has become more interesting than the food. Still, the presence of hot food changes the mood of the room in subtle ways. Hunger makes people impatient and irritable. A warm bowl of pottage calms tempers and encourages guests to linger longer, which benefits the brothel in more ways than one. If you watch the pot carefully, you will see the endless cycle of the stew. A bowl is removed, leaving a small hollow in the surface. A moment later, the kitchen worker pours in more water and adds a handful of chopped vegetables from the table. The spoon moves slowly through the broth again, blending everything together. The stew continues. In a place where nights stretch long and customers arrive hungry from the road, the brothel's kitchen depends on this simple system. Pottage may not be elegant, but it is reliable. It feeds the workers who keep the house running and the travelers who wander in from the dark streets looking for warmth. And tomorrow evening, when the fire is lit once more and the first ingredients drop into the pot, the stew will begin again, never truly ending, only continuing its quiet life inside the smoky kitchen of the brothel. If you spend enough time inside the brothel, watching the movement of people rather than simply listening to the noise, you eventually notice a presence that is both large and strangely calm. Near the entrance, stretched across a patch of worn wooden floor that has been flattened by years of boots passing over it, lies a dog so large that most customers instinctively step around him without needing to be asked. His coat is thick and rough, a mottled mixture of brown and black that blends easily into the shadows near the doorway. His head rests on his paws most of the time, and his eyes remain half closed, as if he is sleeping through the entire chaos of the evening. But anyone who assumes he is truly asleep quickly learns otherwise. This is Brutus, the brothel's mastiff, and although the madam may run the house, Brutus is the one who ensures that the rules are remembered. Mastiffs are not elegant animals. They are massive creatures bred for strength rather than speed, with broad chests, heavy jaws, and thick necks that look capable of pulling a cart if someone decided to attach a harness. Brutus likely weighs as much as a small calf, and when he stands fully upright, his head nearly reaches the waist of most men in the room. His ears twitch occasionally as he listens to the shifting sounds around him, even when his eyes appear closed. The workers move around him with familiarity, stepping carefully over his tail when necessary, and occasionally scratching the back of his neck as they pass. Customers, however, treat him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. A dog this size commands respect simply by existing. Brutus did not arrive at the brothel by accident. In a building where alcohol flows freely and strangers gather from many parts of the city, trouble eventually appears. Arguments break out. Someone tries to leave without paying. A thief decides that a distracted merchant might not notice a missing coin pouch. For all of these situations, the brothel requires something stronger than polite conversation. That is where Brutus becomes useful. For most of the evening, he lies quietly near the door, watching the room through half-lidded eyes. His calm presence alone prevents many problems before they begin. A customer who might otherwise raise his voice suddenly remembers the dog lying between him and the exit. A traveler who considers slipping away without paying notices the size of the animal blocking the doorway and decides that honesty is the safer option. Every so often, Brutus lifts his head and studies someone crossing the room. His gaze is not aggressive, but it is steady enough to make people aware that they are being watched. Then he lowers his head again and resumes his position as if nothing happened. Yet the dog's calm demeanor can change quickly when necessary. Late in the evening, when the brothel is at its busiest, a pair of soldiers near the hearth begin arguing over a spilled mug of ale. At first the disagreement sounds like the usual drunken complaint, but within moments the voices grow sharper. One man pushes the other's shoulder, and chairs scrape loudly across the floor as the argument threatens to become something worse. Before anyone else moves, Brutus rises. The movement is slow, but unmistakable. The enormous dog unfolds himself from the floor and walks toward the two men with deliberate steps that make the wooden boards creak beneath his weight. He does not bark. He does not growl. He simply arrives beside the table and stands there, looking at the soldiers with an expression that suggests he would very much prefer they stop immediately. The effect is remarkable. The argument fades almost instantly. One soldier clears his throat and lifts his mug again as if nothing unusual happened. The other mutters something about accidents and sits back down. Within seconds, the tension dissolves, replaced by awkward laughter from the nearby tables. Brutus watches them for another moment before turning calmly and returning to his spot near the door. Situations like this happen several times each night, and the dog handles them all with the same quiet efficiency. Violence rarely begins when a mastiff is already standing beside the table. Brutus also serves another purpose that becomes clear whenever someone unfamiliar enters the brothel. New customers sometimes arrive with intentions that are less honest than they claim. A quick hand reaching for another man's coin purse, a traveler attempting to slip away without settling his bill, or a pickpocket hoping the crowd will hide his movements. In these moments, the dog's attention sharpens instantly. Once, earlier in the evening, a young man near the door attempted to leave quickly while glancing over his shoulder toward a merchant still arguing about his missing pouch. Before the man reached the street, Brutus stepped directly into his path. The dog did not attack. He simply blocked the doorway with the quiet certainty of an animal that outweighs most of the furniture in the room. The man stopped. Moments later, the madam appeared behind him, her voice calm but firm as she requested the return of the merchant's property. The pouch reappeared quickly, and the man was encouraged to leave the building, this time without anything that did not belong to him. Brutus's role as guardian extends beyond the doorway as well. When the brothel finally grows quieter and the last customers stumble out into the muddy streets, the dog remains awake longer than anyone else. Workers climb the stairs to their crowded rooms. The hearth dims to glowing coals, and the candlelight fades across the empty tables. Through all of this, Brutus walks slowly through the building. He moves from room to room with the patient confidence of an animal that knows every corner of the house. He checks the kitchen where the great pot of pottage rests above dying embers. He pauses near the staircase, listening for unfamiliar footsteps. Occasionally, he sniffs the air near a window or door, making sure nothing outside has slipped quietly into the building. Only when the brothel has fully settled into its nighttime silence does he return to the doorway and lie down again. For the workers who live here, the presence of the mastiff provides a sense of security that is difficult to replace. The medieval city can be unpredictable after dark. Thieves roam the alleys, drunken strangers wander into the wrong buildings. Sometimes, trouble appears without warning. But a house guarded by a dog like Brutus is rarely chosen as an easy target. Even the cats respect him. One of them occasionally curls beside his enormous paws near the door, confident that the giant animal will tolerate the company. Brutus barely reacts, simply adjusting his position slightly to avoid crushing his smaller companion. And so, the brothel continues its nightly life under the quiet watch of its most loyal employee. The madam manages the business, the workers manage the customers, and Brutus manages everything else that might threaten the fragile order inside these smoky walls. He may spend most of the evening pretending to sleep, but everyone in the room understands one simple truth. Nothing truly dangerous happens in this house without Brutus noticing first. If you stand near the doorway long enough, watching the steady rhythm of customers entering and leaving, you might begin to believe that the brothel exists outside the rules of the city entirely. The laughter is loud, the business is constant, and the activities inside these walls seem to follow their own quiet logic rather than any official law. But that illusion fades quickly once you understand something important about medieval cities. The law is always present, even when it appears to be looking the other way. Brothels in this world occupy a strange and uncomfortable position. They are not entirely legal, but they are not entirely forbidden either. Most city authorities recognize that such places exist, and that people will continue to seek them out, whether laws prohibit them or not. Attempting to remove them completely would only push the activity deeper into hidden corners where it becomes harder to control. So instead, many cities adopt a more practical approach. They tolerate brothels, but only under certain conditions, and only as long as those conditions are respected. This creates what can best be described as a legal gray zone. The brothel is allowed to operate, but not openly celebrated. It must remain within certain areas of the city, often districts already known for taverns, inns, and other late-night activity. It must avoid attracting too much attention, and most importantly, it must not cause problems that spill beyond its walls. The madam understands this balance better than anyone. Her business depends on staying just visible enough to attract customers, while remaining quiet enough to avoid drawing the wrong kind of notice. Every decision she makes is shaped by this careful line between tolerance and trouble. Part of maintaining that balance involves something rarely discussed, openly but widely understood: payment to the right people. From time to time, certain officials or guards pass through the district. They may stop at the door, exchange a few quiet words with the madam, and leave with a small pouch that contains just enough coins to ensure that the brothel continues operating without interruption. These payments are not officially recorded anywhere, but they are as much a part of the business as the ledger kept in the back room. The arrangement benefits both sides. The authorities maintain a degree of control over the district without needing to enforce strict prohibitions, and the brothel gains a measure of protection from sudden closures or unnecessary inspections. But protection is never absolute. There are times when the law chooses to remind everyone of its presence. These moments arrive without warning, usually late in the evening when the brothel is at its busiest and least prepared for disruption. The door swings open harder than usual, and instead of the familiar shapes of travelers or merchants, figures in darker clothing step inside. Their posture is different. Their voices are quieter, but sharper. The room reacts immediately, though no one shouts or panics. Conversations slow. Laughter softens. Workers glance toward the madam, waiting for her response. This is an inspection. Officials move through the room with measured steps, observing everything without appearing rushed. They look at the condition of the building, the behavior of the customers, the general order of the space. They may ask a few questions, though the answers are rarely important. What matters is the impression the brothel creates in that moment. Is the house under control? Are the rules being followed? Is there any reason to believe this place has become a problem for the city? The madam greets them calmly, offering polite words and careful explanations when necessary. She knows that confidence is important. Too much nervousness invites suspicion, but too much boldness can be interpreted as disrespect. It is a delicate conversation, one she has likely practiced many times. Meanwhile, the workers continue their tasks with quiet efficiency. Drinks are served, tables are cleared, no one raises their voice unnecessarily. The entire room shifts subtly into a version of itself that appears more orderly, more controlled, more acceptable. After a few minutes that feel longer than they should, the officials nod and make their way back toward the door. Perhaps a small exchange occurs. Nothing obvious, nothing spoken loudly enough for everyone to hear. Then they leave, and the door closes behind them. The tension in the room releases slowly, like a breath held too long. But not all visits from the authorities are so calm. There are occasions when the brothel experiences something closer to a raid. These moments arrive with less patience and more urgency. The door opens suddenly, voices are louder, and the purpose is no longer observation, but enforcement. Such events may be triggered by complaints from nearby residents, pressure from religious authorities, or political decisions made far beyond the walls of this building. When a raid occurs, the atmosphere changes instantly. Customers who were moments ago relaxed become alert, some attempting to leave quickly, while others try to appear as though they have done nothing unusual. Workers move with quiet precision, guiding people towards safer positions within the house, or simply encouraging stillness until the situation settles. The madam steps forward once again, but this time her role is more challenging. She must answer questions, provide explanations, and demonstrate that the brothel is not violating the limits set by the city. Every word matters. Every detail may be examined. Most of the time, if the house has been careful, the situation resolves without severe consequences. A warning may be given. A small penalty may be required. The authorities leave, satisfied that they have reasserted their presence. And just like that, the brothel returns to its routine. Beyond the city officials, there is another force, constantly watching from a different angle: the church. Religious leaders often speak strongly against places like this, describing them as sources of moral decay and spiritual danger. Sermons echo through churches across the city, warning listeners about the risks of temptation and the importance of virtue. Yet even here, the reality is complicated. Some religious authorities recognize that brothels serve a practical function in controlling behavior that might otherwise create greater problems elsewhere. So the criticism continues, sometimes loudly, sometimes quietly, but rarely resulting in complete elimination. The brothel exists between these two pressures, the law that tolerates it and the church that condemns it. Inside the building, life continues under this constant awareness. Every laugh, every conversation, every coin exchanged takes place beneath an invisible layer of caution. The workers know that their livelihood depends not only on serving customers, but on maintaining a delicate relationship with forces beyond their control. Watching the room now, you can see how this awareness shapes behavior. No one speaks too loudly about certain subjects. No one draws unnecessary attention to themselves. Even in moments of celebration, there is a limit that rarely gets crossed. The door opens again, admitting another pair of travelers from the cold night outside. The lantern flickers. The noise rises once more. And yet, somewhere beyond the walls of this warm, crowded room, the city continues watching. The law may not always be visible, but it is never far away. If you stay inside the brothel long enough, long past the laughter, the steady rhythm of mugs and coins, and the illusion that the night will simply continue forever, you begin to notice something quieter, something less visible, but far more persistent. Beneath the noise and movement, there is a constant presence of discomfort, a cough that lingers too long, a wince when someone lifts a heavy tray, a hand that scratches absent-mindedly at the collar or wrist. These are small signs at first, easy to ignore in a place where attention is always pulled in a dozen directions. But they are reminders of something unavoidable in the medieval world. Illness is always close, and health is something people manage rather than expect. In a crowded building like this, where dozens of people pass through each night and workers share rooms, clothing, and limited resources, minor problems spread easily. Lice are perhaps the most common of these. They move quietly through hair and fabric, unnoticed until the itching begins. Workers deal with them as best they can, often with a level of patience that suggests long familiarity. Fine combs are kept among personal belongings, their narrow teeth designed to catch what fingers cannot. Sitting near the hearth or by candlelight, someone may spend several quiet minutes combing carefully through their hair, pausing occasionally to examine what they have removed before continuing the process again. It is not pleasant work, but it is necessary, and it is done without much complaint. Fleas present a similar challenge, though they are less easily controlled. They travel between animals and bedding, hiding in the straw mattresses upstairs or in the seams of clothing. The cats roaming the building help reduce the number of mice that might carry them, but the problem never disappears entirely. Workers learn to live with a certain level of irritation, brushing at their sleeves or adjusting their clothing when the itching becomes too noticeable. More serious issues appear in quieter ways. A cut on the hand from a kitchen knife, a bruise from carrying heavy loads, a strained muscle from long hours of standing. These injuries are rarely dramatic, but they accumulate over time. There are no trained physicians moving through the brothel offering careful treatment. Instead, people rely on simple remedies passed down through experience and tradition. Somewhere in the building, likely in a small storage space near the kitchen or sleeping quarters, there is a collection of herbs kept in small bundles or tied in cloth. These herbs are the closest thing to medicine most people have. If someone develops a cough, they might brew a simple tea using thyme or sage, believing it will soothe the throat. For minor wounds, crushed herbs or poultices made from leaves are applied to the skin, covered with a strip of cloth to hold them in place. Honey, if available, may be used as well, its natural properties helping to protect against infection even if the reason for its effectiveness is not fully understood. When pain lingers, stronger remedies may be attempted. A worker with a persistent headache might be given a mixture of herbs steeped in hot water, the taste bitter but tolerated because it offers even a small chance of relief. For more severe discomfort, alcohol serves as both a distraction and a crude form of medicine, dulling the senses enough to make the pain easier to ignore. Superstition often exists alongside these practical treatments. In a world where the causes of disease are not clearly understood, people search for explanations wherever they can find them. Illness might be attributed to imbalances in the body, to bad air drifting through the streets, or to forces less visible but equally feared. Someone might wear a small charm around their neck, believing it offers protection against sickness. Another might whisper a quiet prayer before drinking an herbal mixture, hoping that something beyond the physical world will assist in the healing process. Occasionally, advice arrives from outside the brothel in the form of traveling healers or local practitioners who claim knowledge of more advanced treatments. Their methods vary widely. Some rely on traditional herbal knowledge, while others suggest practices that seem questionable at best. A recommendation to bleed a patient to restore balance might be offered with complete confidence. Another healer might suggest applying unusual mixtures of ingredients to a wound, trusting in combinations that have been repeated for generations without much understanding of why they might work. The madam listens to such advice carefully, but she is not easily convinced. Experience has taught her which remedies are worth trying and which are best ignored. A worker too ill to continue working represents not only a personal concern, but also a disruption to the delicate balance of the house. So decisions about treatment are made with both care and practicality in mind. Serious illness, when it appears, changes the atmosphere of the brothel in subtle but noticeable ways. A worker who suddenly cannot leave her bed draws quiet attention from the others. Conversations lower slightly in volume when passing her door. Someone might bring food or water upstairs, setting it beside the bed with a few soft words before returning to the busy room below. There is no formal system of care, but there is an understanding that people look after one another as best they can. The greatest fear is not a single illness, but the possibility of something spreading. In a place where so many people share space, disease can move quickly if it takes hold. The brothel cannot afford to close its doors, so precautions are taken when necessary. A worker showing clear signs of serious sickness may be kept away from the main room, resting upstairs until the symptoms pass or become easier to manage. It is not perfect isolation, but it is the closest the house can come to protecting itself. Despite these challenges, life continues. The night does not pause because someone has a fever or a persistent cough. Workers move through the room, carrying trays, speaking with customers, adjusting their sleeves, or scratching at an itch that refuses to disappear. The routines of the brothel create a sense of stability even when health is uncertain. Watching closely, you can see the quiet resilience in these small actions. A woman pauses near the hearth, warming her hands before returning to work. Another adjusts a strip of cloth wrapped around her wrist, hiding a cut that has not fully healed. Someone else takes a quick sip from a cup of herbal tea before setting it aside and stepping back into the flow of the room. In the medieval world, illness is not something that disappears completely. It lingers at the edges of daily life, managed through habit, shared knowledge, and a willingness to continue despite discomfort. Inside the brothel, this reality is simply part of the rhythm. Between laughter and conversation, between coins and candlelight, there is always the quiet work of enduring whatever the body brings with it. And so, the night carries on with all its noise and motion, while in the background, people tend to small injuries, soothe lingering aches, and rely on a mixture of herbs, experience, and hope to carry them through another evening. If you listen closely beneath the laughter, the music, and the constant movement of the room, there is another rhythm that quietly governs everything inside the brothel. It is not as obvious as the clatter of mugs or the murmur of conversation, but it is far more important. It is the steady, persistent movement of money. Every action in this building, from the lighting of candles to the serving of food, is tied in some way to the exchange of coins. Without that flow, the entire structure would collapse almost immediately. At first glance, it may seem as though money moves freely here. Customers arrive, coins appear on tables, drinks are poured, and the evening continues. But the reality is far more structured than it appears. Every coin that enters the house follows a path, and every part of that path is carefully observed. The process begins at the tables. A customer orders a drink, and a few small coins are placed on the wood. Another coin might follow for food. If a longer conversation begins, or something more private is arranged, additional payments are made. The amounts vary depending on the customer, the time of night, and the nature of the request. Some pay generously without much thought. Others count their coins slowly, negotiating quietly before committing to a final amount. From there, the coins begin to disperse. A portion goes directly to the worker who facilitated the exchange. This is the part that feels like personal earnings, the visible reward for hours spent moving through the crowded room, speaking with customers, and maintaining the careful balance of the house. These coins are often tucked quickly into small pouches tied at the waist, hidden beneath layers of fabric to keep them secure. But that is only the beginning. Before the night is over, most of those earnings will return, piece by piece, to the control of the house. The brothel operates on a system that ensures its survival first, and the individual worker second. At the end of the evening, the madam reviews the flow of money with quiet precision. The ledger, in her private room, records not only what has been earned, but what must be taken back. There is rent to consider. The workers do not live here freely. The rooms upstairs, crowded as they are, still represent space within a building that must be maintained. Each worker contributes to that cost, whether through direct payment or through deductions from their nightly earnings. The amount may not seem large at first, but over time it adds up to a significant portion of what they bring in. Then there is food. The endless pot of pottage does not fill itself. Grain must be purchased, vegetables acquired, and meat secured whenever possible. Bread is baked or bought, depending on the resources available. Even the simplest meal carries a cost, and that cost is shared among those who rely on it. Candles and firewood form another quiet expense that is easy to overlook. The brothel burns light and heat constantly throughout the night. Candles melt away one by one, their wax consumed to keep the room illuminated. Firewood disappears into the hearth, feeding the flames that warm the building and cook the food. These supplies must be replaced regularly, and their cost is reflected in the deductions taken from the workers' earnings. Repairs come next. A building like this is never truly finished. Floors wear down under constant traffic. Chairs break under the weight of careless customers. Doors loosen on their hinges, and shutters require mending after strong winds. Even the straw scattered across the floor must be replaced frequently. Each small repair requires materials and labor, and those costs find their way back into the ledger. And finally, there is the madam's share. This is not simply profit in the modern sense. It is the price of management, protection, and the ability to keep the entire operation functioning. The madam negotiates with suppliers, handles interactions with authorities, resolves disputes, and ensures that the brothel remains open night after night. Her portion of the earnings reflects all of these responsibilities. By the time these deductions are complete, what remains for the workers is often far less than what they collected during the evening. A pouch that felt satisfyingly heavy at midnight may feel noticeably lighter by dawn. Yet this system persists because it offers something that is difficult to find elsewhere: consistency. In a medieval city, many forms of work are unpredictable. A laborer may not find employment every day. A traveler may spend weeks searching for opportunities. Even skilled artisans depend on the fluctuating demands of the market. The brothel, by contrast, provides a steady flow of customers and a structured environment where earnings, however reduced, remain reliable. This reliability comes at a cost, but for many, it is a cost worth paying. Watching the room now, you can see how money shapes behavior in subtle ways. A worker spends a few extra moments speaking with a customer who appears willing to pay generously. Another chooses to move quickly between tables, serving more drinks in hopes of increasing her share of the evening's earnings. The madam observes all of this quietly, her attention focused not on individual coins, but on the overall balance of the house. Occasionally, disputes arise over payment. A customer may claim he has already paid for a service, or attempt to reduce the agreed amount after the fact. In these moments, the system reveals its strength. The madam intervenes, the ledger is consulted, and the situation is resolved with firm clarity. There is little room for confusion when every transaction is tracked carefully. Even the smallest details matter. A missing coin here, an unrecorded payment there. Over time, such gaps could undermine the entire structure. That is why the bookkeeping is so meticulous. Each entry in the ledger represents not just a transaction, but a piece of the system that keeps the brothel functioning. As the night continues, the sound of coins remains constant. They slide across tables, drop into hands, and disappear into pouches. Some are spent quickly on more drinks or food. Others are saved carefully, hidden away for future needs that may arise when the brothel doors are closed. By the time the final customers leave and the candles burn low, the room grows quieter. The workers begin to gather their belongings, their movements slower now after hours of constant activity. Somewhere in the back room, the madam sits with the ledger open before her, recording the final entries of the night. Numbers are written, totals calculated, and balances adjusted. The flow of money is captured in ink, transforming the chaos of the evening into something orderly and precise. What remains for each worker is counted and handed back, a smaller portion of what passed through their hands earlier, but still enough to carry them into the next day. For some, it is barely sufficient. For others, it represents a small success in a system that rarely allows for much more. And so the cycle continues. Coins will return tomorrow. The ledger will open again. The same careful balance between earning and deduction will shape another night inside the brothel. Because beneath all the noise, all the movement, and all the stories that pass through these walls, one truth remains constant. Everything here runs on the quiet, relentless flow of money. Not every night inside the brothel unfolds in a rush of voices, clinking coins, and constant movement. There are evenings when the door opens less often, when the lantern outside flickers in a quieter street, and the steady stream of customers slows to an occasional trickle. On those nights, the rhythm of the house changes, the urgency fades, the workers move more slowly, and the building settles into a different kind of life, one shaped not by business, but by the simple need to pass the time. At first, the quiet feels unusual. A table that would normally be filled with loud conversation sits half empty. The lute player near the hearth plucks softer notes, no longer competing with a crowd of voices. Even the goat seems less interested in wandering, choosing instead to lie near the warmth of the fire. The dog at the door remains alert, but his watch feels less intense when there are fewer people to observe. For the workers, these slower nights bring a mixture of relief and restlessness. Fewer customers mean fewer coins, but they also mean a rare opportunity to pause. Without constant demands pulling them from one table to another, they begin to gather in small groups, leaning against walls or settling into chairs usually reserved for guests. Inevitably, someone begins to sing. It starts quietly, almost as a joke, a familiar tune hummed under the breath, or a line of a song that drifts across the room. Another voice joins in, then another, until the melody grows louder and more confident. Without the need to keep the noise controlled for paying customers, the room fills with music that is less careful and far more expressive. The songs are not always refined. Some are rough tavern ballads about travel and misfortune. Others are playful verses filled with humor and exaggerated stories. A few may even carry hints of sadness, reflecting lives shaped by long journeys and uncertain futures. The lute player lifts his head and adjusts his rhythm to match the voices, turning the casual singing into something closer to a performance. For a while, the brothel becomes less a place of business and more a gathering of people sharing the simple pleasure of sound. When the singing fades, another form of entertainment often takes its place. Someone produces a small bundle wrapped in cloth and sets it on a table. Inside are a few crude puppets, simple figures made from scraps of fabric and wood. Their faces are painted with uneven lines, their expressions exaggerated in ways that make them strangely amusing. Puppet shows are not uncommon in medieval life, and even in a place like this, they offer a welcome distraction. A worker slips her hand inside one of the puppets and begins moving it across the table, giving it a voice that is louder and more dramatic than necessary. Another joins in, creating a second character that argues, jokes, or complains depending on the direction of the story. The performance quickly becomes chaotic, filled with exaggerated gestures and improvised dialogue that draws laughter from everyone watching. The stories themselves are rarely serious. They may involve foolish merchants, unlucky travelers, or exaggerated versions of people who resemble customers from previous nights. The humor is simple, sometimes crude, but it fills the room with a different kind of energy, one that does not rely on coin or negotiation. Elsewhere in the room, a different group gathers around a table to play games of chance. Dice appear from pockets, worn smooth from years of use. Cards, if available, are spread across the wood, their edges frayed and their symbols faded. Gambling offers both entertainment and the possibility of earning a little extra money on a night when business is slow. The games rarely remain quiet for long. A lucky roll of the dice brings sudden excitement, while an unlucky loss leads to exaggerated complaints and playful accusations of cheating. Coins change hands quickly, though in smaller amounts than those seen during busier nights. The stakes may be low, but the tension remains real enough to keep everyone engaged. Sometimes the games become more creative. Someone suggests a challenge involving balance or speed. Who can stack cups the fastest? Who can keep a coin spinning the longest? Who can recall the most verses of a song without repeating a line? These competitions often dissolve into laughter before a clear winner is declared, but they serve their purpose. They keep the room alive. Storytelling emerges naturally in these quieter moments as well. Without the constant interruption of customers, people begin sharing longer tales. A traveler might describe a distant town with unusual customs. A worker might recount a strange encounter from a previous evening, embellishing the details just enough to make the story more entertaining. These stories drift through the room, connecting the people inside the brothel to places far beyond its walls. Even the madam allows herself a brief pause during slow nights. Though she remains aware of everything happening in the room, she may stand near the hearth for a moment longer than usual, listening to a story or watching a game unfold. Her presence still carries authority, but the absence of immediate concerns softens the atmosphere slightly. The kitchen contributes to this quieter rhythm as well. With fewer orders to fill, the pottage simmers gently without constant interruption. Someone might bring a bowl to the table and share it with others, eating slowly rather than in hurried bites. Bread is passed from hand to hand, and the simple act of eating becomes part of the shared experience rather than a quick necessity. As the night continues, the brothel feels less like a business and more like a temporary community. Workers, travelers, and even a few lingering customers become part of the same small circle of activity. The boundaries between roles blur slightly, replaced by a shared need to fill the hours until sleep. But even in these quieter moments, the underlying reality remains. The brothel exists to earn money, and slow nights carry a quiet tension of their own. Laughter may fill the room, but it is often accompanied by the awareness that fewer coins have been collected. Conversations occasionally drift toward worries about expenses, about the next busy evening, about the balance recorded in the ledger. Still, For a brief stretch of time, those concerns are set aside. The singing returns, softer now. The dice roll across the table once more. A puppet lies forgotten on the wood, its painted face staring upward as if still part of the performance. The fire crackles steadily, casting warm light across a room that feels momentarily removed from its usual purpose. Outside, the street remains quiet, the lantern by the door swaying gently in the wind. Inside, the brothel continues to live, just in a different way. Because when customers are scarce and the night stretches long, entertainment becomes the work, and the work becomes something shared. If you listen long enough, not just to the laughter or the music, but to the quieter edges of conversation, you begin to notice that the brothel is doing something far more subtle than serving drinks or passing time. Beneath the surface of casual talk, a different kind of exchange is taking place, one that carries no visible weight but moves with surprising speed and influence. It is the steady circulation of information, not official announcements, not proclamations read in the town square, but fragments of truth, exaggeration, suspicion, and whispered certainty. This is the brothel's rumor network, and it travels faster than anything written on parchment. The process begins the moment a customer steps through the door. Every person who enters carries something with them besides coins. A merchant brings news from the market, prices rising, shipments delayed, arguments between guilds. A soldier carries stories from the road, troop movements, rumors of conflict, strange encounters in distant towns. A traveler brings observations, what people are saying elsewhere, what they fear, what they expect. Even those who claim to have nothing interesting to share inevitably reveal something in the way they speak, in the names they mention, in the small details they assume no one is paying attention to. The workers are listening, not always directly, not in a way that feels obvious, but constantly. They learn to follow conversations while appearing focused on something else. A tray is carried across the room, and in passing, a single sentence is heard clearly enough to be remembered. A cup is refilled, and a name is mentioned, someone important, someone recognizable. These small fragments are gathered quietly, stored in memory, and later shared in equally subtle ways. What makes the brothel different from other places is the variety of voices it collects in a single evening. A tavern might attract a certain kind of customer, a marketplace another, but here the groups overlap. A merchant might sit beside a soldier. A minor noble might pass through disguised as an ordinary traveler. A member of the clergy might enter cautiously, speaking in low tones, but still speaking nonetheless. Each of them brings a different piece of the larger picture, and inside these walls, those pieces begin to connect. A rumor rarely arrives fully formed. It begins as a suggestion. Someone mentions that a certain noble has been seen visiting the same house repeatedly. Another adds that the visits occur at unusual hours. A third suggests that the noble's behavior has changed recently, more cautious, more distracted. None of these observations mean much on their own, but when combined, they create something that feels like knowledge. By the time the story reaches the far end of the room, it has already begun to take shape. The speed of this transformation is remarkable. A detail heard early in the evening may be repeated, adjusted, and expanded within a matter of hours. By midnight, what began as a passing comment can become a widely accepted version of events, even if no one can point to a single source with certainty. The workers play a central role in this process, though they rarely appear to be doing so. Their position allows them to move between conversations, carrying fragments from one table to another without ever presenting themselves as the origin of the information. A simple remark, "I heard something similar earlier," can connect two separate discussions, encouraging others to share what they know or believe. In this way, the brothel becomes a place where information is not only exchanged, but refined. Secrets move through this network as well, though they require more care. A careless revelation can have consequences, especially when it involves people of influence. Workers learn to recognize the difference between harmless gossip and something that should be handled more cautiously. A story about a merchant's failed shipment may be shared freely, but a detail about a priest's private behavior might be repeated only in quieter moments, among fewer listeners. Even then, nothing remains completely contained. There is always someone who hears more than they were meant to. A customer seated nearby, pretending not to listen, catches a name or a detail that stays with them. Later, they carry that information elsewhere, repeating it in another setting where it begins a new path of its own. In this way, the brothel's rumor network extends beyond its walls, feeding into the larger flow of information across the city. The madam understands the value of this network better than anyone. While her primary concern is the operation of the house, she is also aware that information can be as valuable as coin. Knowing which merchants are struggling, which officials are under pressure, or which areas of the city are becoming unstable allows her to make decisions that protect the brothel's position. She does not encourage reckless gossip, but she does not ignore it either. At times she may ask a quiet question, nothing direct, nothing that draws attention, just enough to confirm something she has already heard. The answer, if given, becomes part of her understanding of the city's shifting dynamics. Some customers are more willing to talk than others. Those who have been drinking heavily often speak without considering the consequences. Their voices grow louder, their stories more detailed, their caution reduced. They may reveal information they would normally guard carefully, convinced that the noise of the room will hide their words. It rarely does. Others speak more carefully, choosing their words with precision. These individuals are often the most interesting to listen to, because what they do not say can be as revealing as what they do. A pause before answering a question, a change in tone when a certain name is mentioned. These subtle signals are noticed and remembered. Not all rumors are true, of course. Some are exaggerated. Others are entirely invented, created for entertainment, or to provoke a reaction. But even false rumors serve a purpose. They reveal what people are willing to believe, what they fear, what they expect. In that sense, they are as informative as the truth. As the night progresses, the network continues to expand. Conversations overlap, intersect, and diverge. A story that began near the hearth finds its way to the doorway. Another that started in a quiet corner reaches the center of the room, where it is reshaped by new voices. By the time the brothel begins to quiet in the early hours of the morning, the information collected during the night has already begun to settle into memory. Workers carry it with them as they move upstairs, fragments of conversation still echoing in their thoughts. Customers leave the building with new stories to tell, some accurate, others altered, all part of the same continuous flow. Outside, the city remains largely unaware of where these stories began. Inside, the process will repeat again tomorrow, because in a place where so many lives intersect, where voices overlap and boundaries blur, information does not simply pass through. It gathers, shifts, and spreads, moving quietly from one person to another until it becomes something larger than any single conversation. And long before official news reaches the streets, the brothel already knows. If you follow the rhythm of the brothel long enough, you begin to notice that it does not end when the candles burn low or when the final customer stumbles out into the pale light of early morning. The night dissolves slowly, giving way to a quieter stretch of hours where the house rests, recovers, and prepares to begin again. But somewhere within that cycle, there is a different kind of transition, one that pulls the workers away from the smoky rooms and into a space that feels almost opposite in every way. It happens at the end of the week, when the noise fades, the doors remain closed a little longer, and the same people who spent their nights inside the brothel begin preparing for something that exists beyond it. Sunday. The day carries a different weight in the medieval city. Bells ring across rooftops, their sound traveling through narrow streets and echoing between stone walls. The air feels quieter, not because the city is empty, but because its energy has shifted. Shops close or open only briefly. Conversations soften. People dress more carefully than usual, adjusting garments that may have been worn many times before, but are treated with extra attention on this day. Inside the brothel, the change is noticeable even before anyone leaves the building. The workers move more slowly, their exhaustion from the previous nights still present in their bodies. There is less urgency, fewer raised voices, and a shared understanding that this is a time when the usual routines pause, even if only briefly. Preparation begins in small, practical ways. Water is heated for washing, though it is never enough to feel entirely clean. Hair is combed carefully, sometimes more than once, in an attempt to manage the constant presence of lice. Clothing is chosen from what is available, no elaborate wardrobes, just the least worn garments, the ones that appear closest to respectable. A ribbon might be added, a sleeve adjusted, a tear in the fabric smoothed as much as possible. The transformation is not complete, but it is intentional. Then, one by one, or in small groups, they leave the brothel and step into the daylight. The streets they walk through are the same ones they know at night, but they feel different now. The shadows are gone, replaced by a softer light that reveals details usually hidden. People pass by with purpose, moving in the same direction, toward the same destination. The church. From the outside, it stands as a place of order and permanence, its stone walls solid, its doors open to those who enter. Inside, the air is cooler, the light filtered through narrow windows, and the sounds are controlled, measured voices, the murmur of prayer, the occasional echo of footsteps across the floor. For the workers, entering this space requires a quiet adjustment. The habits of the brothel do not disappear instantly, but they are set aside as much as possible. Voices lower, movements become more deliberate. Eyes remain forward, avoiding unnecessary attention. Yet the awareness never fully fades. They know how they are seen. In a world where reputation carries weight, the presence of brothel workers in the church is not unnoticed. Some people glance briefly, then look away. Others maintain a careful distance, as if proximity alone might carry some form of judgment. A few may whisper quietly, though the words are rarely clear enough to be understood. Still, the workers return each week, because faith, like everything else in their lives, is complicated. The service begins, and the priest speaks in a steady voice that carries through the space. The words are familiar, repeated week after week, forming a structure that feels stable in a world that is often anything but. There are prayers, readings, and reflections, each part following a pattern that has been practiced for generations. And then come the sermons. It is here that the tension becomes most visible, even if no one says anything directly. The priest speaks of morality, of proper conduct, of the dangers of temptation. He warns against behavior that leads people away from what is considered right. He speaks of discipline, of self-control, of the importance of living in accordance with certain expectations. The workers listen. They do not interrupt. They do not respond. They sit quietly, absorbing words that often feel directed toward lives very much like their own. There is no open confrontation, no dramatic moment of recognition. Instead, there is a quiet awareness, a recognition that the distance between what is said and what is lived cannot easily be closed. And yet, they remain. After the sermon, the service continues. Rituals unfold with practiced precision, each action carrying meaning that has been shaped over time. Participation is expected, and the workers follow along as best they can, moving through the familiar sequence with a mixture of habit and attention. For some, this is a moment of genuine reflection. The quiet of the church offers something the brothel cannot. A space where time slows in a different way, where the constant noise of the night is replaced by something more still. Thoughts that are usually pushed aside may surface briefly, considered, and then set aside again. For others, the experience is more practical. Attendance is part of life in the city, and absence would draw more attention than presence. Being seen in the church maintains a connection to the wider community, even if that connection is fragile. Confession adds another layer to this experience. The act of speaking privately with a priest, of acknowledging actions and seeking some form of absolution, is both personal and structured. The words used are often familiar, repeated in similar forms by many people. The responses follow a pattern as well, offering guidance, instruction, and the promise of forgiveness under certain conditions. For the workers, confession can feel both necessary and incomplete. The nature of their work does not easily change, and the expectations placed upon them by the church do not always align with the realities of their lives. Still, the act of participating in this ritual provides a sense of continuity, a way to navigate the space between belief and circumstance. When the service ends, the transition back to daily life begins. People leave the church in small groups, their conversations returning gradually. The workers step outside once more, the daylight still present but beginning to soften as the hours pass. The walk back to the brothel feels different from the walk to the church. The quiet reflection of the service lingers briefly, but the familiar world of the city begins to reassert itself. The streets grow louder. The routines of the day return. By the time they reach the brothel door, the separation between the two spaces has already begun to fade. Inside, the house waits. The rooms are still, the air holding the remnants of the previous night. Soon enough, the preparations will begin again. The hearth will be lit, the pottage stirred, the candles replaced. The cycle continues, unchanged by the brief pause of Sunday. And yet, something remains. Not a resolution, not a clear answer, but an ongoing balance. Faith and work exist side by side, neither fully replacing the other. The workers move between these worlds each week, carrying with them a quiet understanding that both are part of their lives. The church offers structure, reflection, and the promise of something beyond the immediate moment. The brothel offers survival, routine, and the reality of the present. Between the two, they continue. If you spend enough nights watching the door instead of the room, you begin to notice that not everyone who enters the brothel arrives with the same purpose. Most come for warmth, for company, for distraction from the long wait of their own lives. They are easy to read, they speak loudly, move carelessly, and leave behind the familiar traces of any ordinary evening. But every so often, someone steps inside who does not belong to that rhythm. They pause just a moment too long at the threshold, their eyes adjusting not to the light, but to the people. They are not here to relax. They are here to observe. These visitors rarely announce themselves. They dress like anyone else, choosing clothing that blends into the general shape of the crowd. A plain cloak, worn boots, nothing that draws attention. Yet there is something in the way they carry themselves. A quiet awareness of space, a habit of noticing entrances and exits, a tendency to listen more than they speak. They choose their seats carefully, often positioning themselves where they can see as much of the room as possible without appearing to do so. The workers notice them, not immediately and not always consciously, but over time, patterns become familiar. A regular customer behaves in predictable ways. A traveler reveals his purpose within a few sentences. But these individuals move differently. They ask questions that seem casual, but arrive too precisely. They linger near conversations without fully joining them. They remember details. Some of them are spies, though the word is rarely spoken aloud. In a city where power shifts quietly between families, guilds, and officials, information becomes a valuable resource. The brothel, with its constant flow of voices and its natural lowering of caution, provides an ideal place to gather that resource. A merchant who has had too much to drink might reveal the timing of a shipment. A soldier might mention orders he was not meant to repeat. A minor official might complain about decisions made above him, offering insights into matters that rarely leave closed rooms. The spy listens, collects, and leaves. But not all of these visitors are working for distant powers or hidden masters. Some are nobles, moving through the city in ways that require discretion. They arrive late, often alone, their cloaks drawn slightly tighter, their faces partially hidden in shadow. They do not want to be recognized, but they also do not want to appear as though they are hiding. It is a delicate balance, one that is rarely perfect. The workers recognize them as well. A noble may attempt to disguise his voice or avoid certain gestures, but small details give him away. The quality of his boots, the way he speaks when he forgets to be careful, the hesitation before touching something that others would handle without thought. These are subtle signs, but in a place where observation is constant, they are enough. The presence of such individuals changes the atmosphere of the room in ways that are difficult to describe but easy to feel. Conversations nearby become slightly more measured. Workers approach with a different kind of attention, aware that these interactions may carry consequences beyond the immediate exchange. Sometimes, the noble seeks nothing more than anonymity, a brief escape from the expectations that follow him through the rest of the city. But sometimes, his presence brings something else with it, information that should not be spoken, connections that should not be seen, decisions that are not yet public. And then, there are those who come with intent that is sharper still. Blackmail is not a common occurrence, but it exists quietly within the edges of this world. A person who knows too much, or believes they do, may attempt to use that knowledge to their advantage. They watch, they wait, and they choose their moment carefully. A whispered conversation in a corner, a subtle suggestion that certain actions have been noticed, that certain details could be repeated elsewhere if not handled properly. These moments rarely unfold in dramatic ways. There are no loud confrontations, no sudden revelations. Instead, they pass quietly, almost invisibly, through the same channels as ordinary conversation. A worker may notice a shift in tone, a pause that lasts a little too long, a glance exchanged between two people that carries more meaning than the words spoken aloud. The madam is particularly attentive to such situations. She understands that while information can be valuable, it can also be dangerous. A brothel that becomes too closely associated with intrigue risks attracting the wrong kind of attention from authorities or powerful individuals who prefer their affairs to remain private. So when something feels out of balance, she intervenes, not aggressively, but firmly enough to redirect the situation before it grows. A conversation may be interrupted with a simple question. A customer may be encouraged to move to another table. A worker may be quietly instructed to avoid a particular individual. These actions are subtle, but they are effective. The goal is not to confront, but to dissolve the moment before it becomes something larger. Despite these precautions, the brothel cannot entirely separate itself from the wider currents of the city. It sits at a crossroads where information naturally gathers, and as long as people continue to speak freely within its walls, it will remain a place where knowledge is exchanged. Even the workers, who are accustomed to hearing fragments of many stories, sometimes find themselves caught in these currents. A detail remembered from one night may connect unexpectedly to something heard days later. A name mentioned casually may appear again in a different context, carrying new significance. Over time, patterns emerge, though they are rarely complete. The danger lies not in knowing too little, but in knowing just enough. As the night continues, these quieter threads of intrigue weave themselves through the more obvious activities of the brothel. A spy listens at one table, while a group of travelers sings loudly at another. A noble sits in shadow, while a merchant complains about the price of grain. A conversation that appears ordinary may carry implications that extend far beyond the room. And yet, to most of those present, nothing seems unusual. The candles burn as they always do. The coins move from hand to hand. The door opens and closes, admitting new faces and releasing old ones back into the night. The brothel continues its work, unchanged on the surface, while beneath that surface, information flows in directions that are not always visible. Eventually, the more cautious visitors leave as quietly as they arrived. They step back into the darkness of the street, carrying with them whatever they have gathered. The room closes behind them, the noise resumes its familiar rhythm, and the moment passes. But the traces remain, a name remembered, a detail noted, a conversation that lingers in the mind longer than it should. Inside the brothel, these fragments settle into the same quiet network that carries rumors and stories across the city. They may not be understood immediately, but they are not forgotten, because in a place where so many lives intersect, not everyone is here for the same reason. And not every conversation is as simple as it sounds. There are moments in the night, usually not during the busiest hours, but somewhere in between, when the brothel seems to exhale. The noise softens, the movement slows, and for a brief stretch of time, the workers are no longer rushing from one task to another. It is in these small pockets of stillness, leaning against a wall near the hearth, sitting at the edge of a table after the last mug has been cleared, or standing by the window watching the faint glow of the street, that thoughts begin to drift somewhere else entirely, away from the building, away from the routines, away from the endless repetition of nights that feel almost identical to one another. This is when the idea of leaving begins to take shape. It rarely arrives as a fully formed plan. Instead, it starts as a quiet possibility, something imagined rather than expected. Someone mentions a town they once passed through, a place where the air smelled different and the streets felt less crowded. Another recalls a traveler who spoke of work that did not involve long nights and constant noise. These fragments settle into the mind, forming the beginnings of a different life that exists somewhere beyond the brothel's walls. Marriage is often the first path people speak of, not because it is guaranteed, but because it offers a clear and recognizable way out. A customer who returns regularly, who speaks kindly, who pays without argument, such a person becomes the subject of quiet speculation. Could he be convinced to stay? Could he offer something more permanent than a passing visit? These questions are rarely asked directly, but they linger in conversation, shaped by cautious hope. Stories circulate of others who have left in this way. A woman who once worked in a house like this and now lives in a small home on the edge of the city. Another who married a merchant and travels with him from town to town. Whether these stories are entirely true does not always matter. They exist as examples, as proof that escape is possible, even if it is rare. Travel offers another version of that possibility. The brothel sees a constant flow of people from distant places, and with them come descriptions of roads that stretch far beyond the city. A traveler might speak of open fields, of quiet villages, of markets where the noise is different and the face is unfamiliar. For someone who has spent years within the same walls, these descriptions carry a powerful weight. The idea of simply leaving, walking out the door, and continuing past the familiar streets, past the boundaries of the city, into something unknown, can feel both thrilling and impossible. There are practical concerns, of course. Where would one go? How would one earn a living? What dangers might lie along the road? These questions often remain unanswered, and so the idea of travel stays where it began, in the realm of imagination. Still, it persists. New kinds of work are discussed as well, though they are often harder to define. Some speak of positions in households, of serving in kitchens, or assisting with daily tasks in more stable environments. Others consider trades that might be learned over time, skills that could provide a different kind of independence. These conversations tend to be more grounded, more focused on what might actually be possible rather than what is merely hoped for. Yet even these plans face obstacles. Opportunities are limited, and the reputation carried by someone leaving a brothel does not disappear easily. The world beyond these walls is not always welcoming, and the path to something different is rarely straightforward. People understand this, even if they do not always say it aloud. and so the dreams remain. They are shared in quiet conversations, often late in the night or early in the morning, when the room has emptied and the urgency of work has faded. Two workers might sit together, speaking softly about what they would do if they had enough money, enough time, enough opportunity. The details vary, but the feeling is consistent, a sense of reaching towards something just beyond their grasp. Hope, in this context, is not loud or dramatic. It does not demand attention or declare itself with certainty. Instead, it exists in small, steady ways. It appears in the careful saving of a few coins, tucked away, rather than spent immediately. It appears in the decision to listen closely when a traveler describes a distant place. It appears in the willingness to imagine a future that looks different from the present. At the same time, there is an understanding that not all dreams will become reality. For many, the brothel remains the center of their lives for longer than they once expected. Days turn into weeks, weeks into years, and the routines that once felt temporary become familiar. The idea of leaving does not disappear, but it changes. It becomes less immediate, less urgent, something that might happen one day rather than something that must happen soon. Watching the room now, you can see both sides of this balance. A worker laughs at a table, fully engaged in the moment, her attention focused on the conversation in front of her. Nearby, another stands quietly for a moment longer than necessary, her gaze drifting toward the doorway as if measuring the distance between where she is and where she might go. Neither of these perspectives is more real than the other. They exist together, shaping the way people move through their days and nights. Even the madam, who appears firmly rooted in her role, carries her own understanding of this balance. She has likely seen many come and go, some leaving successfully, others returning, after finding that the world beyond offered fewer opportunities than they had hoped. Her management of the house reflects this knowledge. She allows room for possibility, but she also maintains the structure that keeps everything functioning. As the night continues, the door opens again, and another traveler steps inside. He brings with him the usual things: dust from the road, the smell of the outside world, and perhaps without realizing it, another set of stories waiting to be told. Someone will listen, someone will remember, and later, when the room grows quieter and the conversation turns inward, those stories will become part of the quiet network of dreams that lives alongside everything else in the brothel. Because even in a place defined by routine, repetition, and the constant presence of the present moment, there is always space for something else, a thought, a possibility, a way out that may never fully arrive, but never completely disappears either. By the time the night begins to loosen its grip on the city, the brothel feels different in a way that is difficult to notice at first. The noise has not stopped entirely, but it has thinned. Conversations that once overlapped now drift in separate pockets. Laughter still appears, but it arrives more slowly, as if it has to travel farther to reach the center of the room. The candles burn lower, their flames smaller and less steady, and the air carries the quiet signal that something is coming to an end, even if no one has said it aloud yet. Dawn approaches gradually. It does not announce itself with a sudden change, but with small, almost unnoticeable shifts. The darkness outside the windows softens. The outlines of the street begin to emerge from shadow. The lantern near the door, once the brightest point of light, becomes less important as the sky begins to take on a faint gray tone. Inside, the brothel continues its final stretch of activity, but the energy has changed. The urgency is gone, replaced by a steady winding down that feels both familiar and inevitable. The last customers are always the slowest to leave. Some linger over the remains of their drinks, speaking in quieter voices than they used earlier in the night. Others sit in a kind of tired silence, their thoughts turned inward as the weight of the coming day begins to settle. A few attempt to continue, as if the night has not ended, but even they eventually rise, gathering their belongings and stepping unsteadily toward the door. Each departure leaves the room a little emptier. The workers watch this process with a mixture of patience and relief. They continue their tasks, clearing tables, collecting empty mugs, and guiding the remaining guests gently but firmly toward the exit. There is no rush, no sharp insistence, just a quiet understanding that the night has reached its natural conclusion. When the final customer steps outside and the door closes behind them, the brothel falls into a rare kind of silence. It is not complete silence. The fire still crackles softly in the hearth. The floor creaks under the movement of those still awake. Somewhere upstairs, someone shifts in their sleep, but compared to the constant noise of the night, it feels almost still. This is when the work changes. The focus turns inward, away from the needs of others, and toward the small rituals that mark the end of each night. Coins are brought out from hidden pouches, placed carefully on tables, and counted one by one. The sound is softer now, more deliberate. There is no need to hurry, but there is a need to be precise. Each worker knows that these coins represent more than just the night's effort. They are the result of every conversation, every step taken across the room, every moment spent balancing between patience and performance. Counting them is not simply a practical task. It is a quiet acknowledgement of what has just been endured. Some counts are followed by small smiles, a sign that the night has been favorable. Others end with a slight tightening of the jaw, a recognition that the earnings will not stretch as far as hoped. These reactions are rarely spoken aloud. They remain contained, part of the internal rhythm that each person carries. Nearby, the madam reviews her own records, the ledger open once again as she confirms the totals. Her work is steady, unchanged by the hour. Even now, as the rest of the house slows, she continues to bring order to the chaos of the night, transforming scattered transactions into clear lines of ink. In the kitchen, the fire is coaxed back into a stronger flame. The great pot of pottage, which has been simmering through the night, is stirred once more. A small addition of water, a handful of whatever remains from the previous day, and the cycle continues. The smell of warm food begins to spread again, softer this time, less urgent, but no less welcome. Breakfast, if it can be called that, is simple. Bowls are filled, bread is cut, and the workers gather in small groups to eat. There is no formal arrangement, no assigned seating. People sit where they can, leaning against walls, resting on chairs, or standing near the hearth. The food is the same as before, but it feels different now. There is no need to rush through it. Each bite is taken slowly, accompanied by the quiet satisfaction of having reached the end of another night. Conversation returns, but in a new form. Without customers to manage, the workers speak more freely. They recount moments from the night, sharing small stories that might have been overlooked in the rush of activity. A particularly difficult customer becomes the subject of gentle humor. A surprising interaction is retold with added detail, the story growing slightly with each repetition. Laughter comes more easily now, less forced, more genuine. These conversations serve an important purpose. They transform the chaos of the night into something understandable, something that can be shared and, in a way, set aside. By speaking about what happened, the workers create a sense of distance from it, allowing themselves to move forward without carrying every detail. The mood is not entirely light, but it is lighter than before. Even Brutus, who has remained watchful through the night, relaxes slightly. He stretches, shifts his weight, and settles into a more comfortable position near the doorway. The cats move more freely now, no longer weaving through crowded feet, but exploring the quieter room with curiosity. Outside, the city is beginning to wake. The sounds of early activity drift faintly through the walls, distant footsteps, the opening of shutters, the first voices of the day. The brothel, which has just completed its busiest hours, now moves in the opposite direction. While the rest of the city rises, this building prepares to rest. One by one, the workers begin to withdraw. Some carry their bowls to the side and set them down carefully. Others finish their conversations and stand, stretching tired muscles, before making their way toward the staircase. The rooms upstairs wait, unchanged from the night before, offering little comfort, but enough to allow for a few hours of sleep. Before leaving the main room, a few pause. They look around, taking in the space now that it has emptied. The tables, the chairs, the hearth, the door. All the elements that define their nightly world appear calmer, almost unfamiliar, without the constant movement that usually fills them. It is a brief moment of stillness, a chance to see the brothel as it exists between nights. Then they turn and go. The madam remains a little longer, ensuring that everything is in order. The ledger is closed, the final details checked, and the room is left ready for the next cycle. Only when she is satisfied does she step away, leaving the house to its temporary quiet. The fire dims slightly, the light softens, and the brothel settles into its daytime silence. But this silence is never permanent. It is a pause, nothing more. Because as the sun rises higher and the hours pass, the same preparations will begin again. The pottage will be stirred, the candles will be replaced, the floor will be swept, the tables reset, the door opened once more, and when evening returns, bringing with it the familiar darkness and the steady flow of footsteps outside, the brothel will wake again, ready to repeat everything, all over again.